Hey guys, tonight we're slipping back through the smoke-filled alleys and chattering markets of the medieval world to discover what fast food looked like before deep fryers, delivery apps, or anything remotely resembling health inspections. Spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this, not just because of the questionable meat pies, but because medieval street food was served in an era where soap was suspicious, refrigeration was sorcery, and hand-washing was an upper-class myth. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your city and time in the comments. I'm always curious who's tuning in and when. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're walking down a narrow cobblestone lane in a medieval town, probably London, maybe Paris. It's around midday, and the street is alive with the smell of sizzling fat sweet ale and something vaguely fishy. You're not sure if it's coming from a nearby stall or the open sewer trickling along the side of the road. Either way, it's a scent you're learning to live with. Shouts echo from every direction. Vendors hawk their food in loud melodic pitches that sound more like chant than sales talk. Children dart between carts. A man in a faded tunic is chasing a chicken that does not want to be dinner. This is your medieval food court. The entire city really is a kind of open-air restaurant. There are no drive-thrus. There are no menus printed in Comic Sans on backlit signs. But there is food. Lots of it. Some of it actually hot. You turn a corner and find a woman standing behind a cart built from reused timber and lashed together with rope. She's got a steaming cauldron of something that smells surprisingly decent. Onion, barley, maybe some root vegetables if you're lucky. No meat today, unless you count the hint of marrow clinging to one of the bones bobbing in the pot. It's thick, goopy, and served in a shallow wooden bowl. Though if you're poor enough, she'll ladle it straight into your cupped hands. No shame here, fast food doesn't judge. Bread is your base layer, everything comes with bread. Round loaves, flat rolls, or if you're slumming it, which, let's be honest you are, dark, rough-textured black bread cut into thick hunks. You tear off a piece, dip it into the stew and chew. It's filling, it's warm, and it cost you just one small coin. You didn't even sit down. That's the key. This food isn't made to linger over. It's survival-grade cuisine. It's designed to keep you moving, working, surviving one day at a time. For most medieval folks, there's no hearth at home, no personal kitchen. Cooking takes time and fuel, both luxuries, so street food becomes the default. You walk past another stall, this one manned by a grizzled guy with half a beard and a permanently annoyed expression. He's got skewers of something meat-adjacent roasting over a pit. You think it's pork, or goat, maybe cat. You really, really hope not cat. But people are lined up for it, coins in hand, and he's slapping them with sauce from a jug that may or may not have started life as wine. Again, you could ask questions. But in this era, curiosity is rarely rewarded. Now for the fun part, in medieval times, eating in public wasn't lowbrow. It was life. Rich, poor, merchant, pilgrim. Everyone ate in the streets. Marketplaces doubled as food courts. Back alleys, pop-up restaurants. There's even records of open-air cookshops in major cities like London and York as far back as the 12th century. They didn't have logos or slogans, but they had reputations. If one vendor poisoned a customer, or served rat instead of rabbit, you better believe the gossip would spread faster than a fryer with gossip. One quirky truth. Bread often doubled as a plate. They were called trenchers, thick, stale slices used to hold stew or meat. You'd eat the meal, then eat the plate. It sounds efficient until you realise how hard medieval bread could get. You could probably shingle a roof with it. Still, you don't have to worry about cleanup. You pass a man selling pies. Not dessert pies. This isn't a Renaissance fair. These are meat pies, thick-crusted and hand-sized, the perfect walk and snack option. They might be filled with spiced beef, or a dubious mix of organs and oats. Either way, you buy one. The crust is flaky, the inside hot and oily. You're not sure what that chewy bit was, but you're too hungry to care. It tastes fine. It fills you. It'll do? You duck into a shady corner, maybe behind a cooper's workshop, and watch the stream of humanity move through this urban buffet. A monk haggles with a fishmonger. A woman balances a pot of stew on her head. A child steals a boiled egg from a distracted vendor. It's chaos, but it works. Interestingly, there's an ongoing scholarly debate about how regulated all this was. Some historians argue that medieval cities had strict rules about where and when food could be sold. And who could sell it? Others think enforcement was patchy at best, especially outside of feast days or major markets. Either way, you're clearly not the only one gambling with your stomach lining. You finish your pie and wash it down with a mug of weak ale. Because yes, even breakfast might include ale. Safer than the water, and cheaper than wine, it's lukewarm. Slightly sour, but it slides down easy. Hydration achieved. By now the street's growing louder. More vendors appear, more smells fill the air. You feel full but slightly uneasy. That stew might have had a little something extra. Or maybe your body just isn't used to medieval flavour profiles. Either way, you've had your first encounter with medieval fast food. Congrats. You're fed, you're slightly queasy, you're doing great. You leave behind the steaming stew carts and the alley pies, turning down a slightly wider lane that smells more like spilled ale and burnt meat than fish and onions. The crowds thicken here. Not the kind chasing chickens or hawking vegetables, but people who look like they actually sat down to eat. This is tavern territory, and in the medieval world, taverns are where food gets fast and a little fancy. You push open a heavy wooden door into a low-beamed room filled with the hum of chatter, clinking tankards, and the occasional belch that could rattle a rafter. The floor is packed dirt, tamped flat by centuries of boots, and the lighting is provided by a few flickering tallow candles that don't so much illuminate as smudge shadows across every corner. Smoke curls up to a hole in the ceiling. Not quite a chimney, but it'll do. Welcome to your medieval combo meal experience. Taverns aren't just watering holes, they're the closest thing you're getting to a restaurant with an actual roof. A place where you can sit, eat hot food quickly, and still be on your way in under an hour. It's fast, it's noisy, it's communal, and no one expects you to wash your hands. You grab a bench at a long wooden table, already occupied by a group of wool-clad workers, digging into bowls of thick porridge and chunks of sausage glistening with grease. No menus here, just a rotating selection of what the cook managed to scrape together that morning. The owner, or taverner, if we're being precise, ambles over. He's got a grease-stained apron and the weary look of a man who's been haggling with butchers since dawn. You ask for food and he grunts something about salt pork and leeks. You nod. He disappears. That's the thing about taverns in the Middle Ages. The food's whatever was available, affordable, and not yet turning green. If you're lucky, you get a hot, savoury dish with actual seasoning. If you're not, it's yesterday's leftovers in a new bowl. Either way, it's hot and it's yours fast. A few minutes later, your meal appears. Salt pork, boiled till it's tender, floating in a pool of leek broth. Next to it, a slice of barley bread tough enough to chew for a week. You dig in. It's salty, earthy, heavy. Not bad, honestly. Kind of like a rustic soup and sandwich combo minus the sandwich part, and with extra pig fat it sticks to your ribs. Mission accomplished. The room around you pulses with life. A group of merchants at the far end is deep into their second round of ale. One of them bangs on the table and shouts something about dried cod prices, while another laughs hard enough to spit ale into his own beard. Over by the hearth, a pair of young travellers quietly devour a shared dish of beans and cheese, clearly starving from the road. It's a mix of locals, travellers, students, even a priest or two pretending they're not enjoying the salted meat. Taverns were the great equaliser of medieval food culture. Whether you were a landless labourer or a minor noble passing through town, if you had coin, you could eat. Sure, the nobles might sit in a slightly nicer corner or rent a private room upstairs, but the food came from the same pot. That was part of the appeal, and in cities like Paris or Florence, taverns sometimes became hubs of political chatter and literary gossip, especially in university districts. Food, drink, and subversive Latin poetry. A full medieval menu. One fun historical fact: in many places taverns were legally required to sell bread and food along with drink, mostly to keep people from drinking themselves to death. The logic was, get a few bites in you, maybe you'll make it home. Whether that actually worked is debatable. The tavern also doubles as your medieval drive-through in the sense that you can order your food to go. Yes, takeout existed. You could pay for a bowl of hot food, pour it into your own little clay pot or wrapped trenchers, and be on your way. It wasn't glamorous, but if you were headed to work or just wanted to eat in peace without a wandering minstrel breathing onion breath down your neck, it worked. You glance over and notice a woman has set up shop right outside the tavern door. She's got a basket full of cold pies and hard cheese, selling to those who don't want to deal with the tavern crowd. She's technically competition, but the taverner tolerates her. Maybe she's his cousin, maybe she pays him in cheese, who knows. That's how these places work, informal networks, whispered agreements, unspoken rules. Medieval Yelp is just who hasn't given you food poisoning yet. There's an open question among scholars about whether these taverns mostly served locals or travellers. Some say they catered more to the latter, given their position near city gates or crossroads. Others argue they were neighbourhood staples, kind of like a local pub meets short-order kitchen. The evidence swings both ways, but either way you're here now and your belly's no longer grumbling. You look around again, no forks, nobody's using one. It's mostly fingers, knives, and the occasional spoon. Forks, as a dining tool, are still something of an exotic novelty, rumoured to be effeminate or even morally suspicious in certain circles. So you stick with your fingers and your knife, tearing pork and sopping broth like everyone else. Your tankard is empty now. You think about ordering another ale, but the room's gotten louder, rowdier. Someone's arguing about taxes in the corner, and a small dog is barking at a spilled carrot like it just insulted his mother. You've had your fill. You wipe your hands on your tunic, no napkin, sorry, and step back outside. The sun's still up barely. The street has shifted tone. The stew carts are gone. Now it's roasted nuts, hot chestnuts, baked apples. Light affair for evening wanderers. But that's a story for another hour. For now you've experienced medieval fast food at its cosiest, most chaotic and most communal. The tavern. Not quite a restaurant, not quite a bar, but somewhere in between, where time is short, the broth is hot, and the salt pork always tastes like home, even if it wasn't your home to begin with. You're back on the move now, weaving through the press of bodies and carts that clog the main square. The light has softened, golden and hazy, and the air smells richer than it did an hour ago. Someone nearby is roasting something flaky and peppery. It hits your nose and stops you dead in your tracks. Then you see him. A pie man. He's pushing a cart balanced on two wheels and a miracle, its sides blackened from years of smoke and grease. On top rests a small brazier glowing with hot coals, and perched around it like a crown of edible jewels are hand-sized meat pies, their crimped edges browned and bubbling. You drift toward him, hypnotized. This is the real deal. Street-level luxury, the medieval equivalent of a burger stand during rush hour. The pie man grins without looking up. He's busy rotating the pastries with a pair of iron tongs, his hands calloused and soot-streaked. You ask what's inside. He shrugs. Meat. You press for details. Maybe chicken, maybe not. It's the most honest answer you'll get all day. Still, people love these things. It's the ultimate hand food. Warm, filling, portable. You can eat it while walking, while working, while making questionable life decisions behind a stable. The crust keeps the mess inside, and the mystery of the filling keeps your expectations low. That's the genius of it. The medieval meat pie. Delicious, disposable, and possibly made of things you'd rather not name. Historically, meat pies were everywhere. England, France, the Low Countries. Some used spiced pork and eggs. Others were filled with chopped liver, fish, or even dormice if you were Roman enough to keep old habits alive. The crust was called a coffin, not because it killed you, though sometimes it probably did, but because it literally encased the meat like a sealed box. In many cases you didn't even eat the crust. It was just the medieval version of a takeout container. You hand over a coin and take one. It's hot enough to burn your fingers. You bite through the crust and into something savoury, meaty, and slightly peppered. There's a mushy texture inside, punctuated by bits of gristle that remind you, gently, that the meat was chopped quickly and not with care. Still, it's weirdly satisfying. The crust flakes apart like buttery shale. A stream of oily juice runs down your chin. Congratulations, you're officially part of a tradition that fed peasants, pilgrims and poets for centuries. But meat pies aren't just a convenience, they're a loophole. See, most people didn't have ovens. Ovens were communal or attached to bakeries, so folks would bring their pies, covered and ready, to be baked in someone else's oven for a fee. This created a bustling trade around pies, not just selling them, but baking them, sharing them, making a little extra coin with your hearth. And of course, if you were sneaky enough, you could stretch the meat with oats or chopped onions, pocket the difference, and no one would know. Probably. There's a fringe historical tidbit about huff paste, a rock-hard pastry shell used to encase the pie contents for long-distance travel. It was basically inedible, and designed only to protect the meat from spoiling or being touched by the outside world. So yes, some meat pies were meant to last for days on the road, long before anyone had heard of preservatives or vacuum seals. Just salt, heat and crust like concrete. You walk on, chewing the last bite, and spot a pair of kids arguing over a pie that's half eaten. One swears it's fish, the other says it's eel. They're both right. Eel was a common cheap filler for pies, especially in England. Slippery, chewy, and easily caught in rivers or bought in barrels, there were even pie recipes combining eel and fruit. Try not to gag. People ate what was available, and in this world, availability was everything. There's a shadow to this, though. Scholars still argue about just how safe these street pies were. On one hand, they were cooked, hot, and baked, so theoretically, less risky than raw meats. On the other hand, refrigeration didn't exist. Meat went bad quickly, and shortcuts were common. There are historical records of vendors being punished for selling spoiled pies, even some fined for using corrupt flesh. Some unlucky souls even made it to court when customers got sick. Whether justice was served or just baked into the next day's batch is anyone's guess. Still, pie culture flourished. There were seasonal pies, festival pies, religious pies. During Lent you'd get fish or cheese pies instead of meat. For the Feast of St. Martin, goose pie, and during coronations or great banquets, pies the size of wagon wheels were wheeled in as centerpieces. In one legendary banquet, guests cut into a giant pie and live birds flew out. Just a little dinner theatre with your duck liver. You reach another corner and find an older woman tending a low stone oven built into the wall of a crumbling shop. Her pies are smaller, crispier. You recognise the smell. Onion, herbs, and maybe some offal. She smiles as you glance over. Her cart's neat, organised. She's probably been doing this for decades. This isn't just survival, it's a profession. Street cooks were often older women, widows, or lower-class wives supplementing income. They knew how to feed a crowd with flavour, speed, and no waste. You respect the hustle. She offers you a fresh one, on the house. You take it. This one's got a flaky crust dusted with something that tastes like fennel and pepper. The filling? Still a mystery, but somehow cleaner, brighter. You nod, mouth full. She nods back. No words. Just mutual understanding between two people bound by pastry. As the sun drops and the air cools, more pie carts appear, not fewer. Evening means workers returning home, children out on errands, travellers arriving late, the demand spikes. Pie men work the crowd with practised efficiency, shouting their slogans, flipping their wares, slipping fresh batches onto the coals. This is prime time, and you, belly full and hands greasy, are part of the rhythm. You walk on, savouring the last bite of crust before tossing the inedible corner to a passing dog. It sniffs it, gives you a look of betrayal, and trots away. Fair enough. Not everyone loves huff paste, but you're warming up to the life. Medieval fast food may not have golden arches, but it's got golden crusts, smoky corners, and the kind of charm only slightly questionable meat can deliver. The sky shifts to a cloudy grey as you move toward the edge of the marketplace, where the stalls thin out and the scents grow sharper. Oil, smoke, and brine. It hits you all at once. Fried fish. Welcome to medieval Friday dining, where religious obligation meets culinary improvisation. And in this case, it's deliciously greasy. Because it's Friday, and in the medieval Christian world that means no meat. Fish, however, is fair game. The church says so. In fact, fish isn't even considered flesh in the theological sense, which is a fun loophole that led to one of the most thriving corners of medieval fast food, the fried fish vendor. You follow your nose to a rickety cart set beside a shallow stone basin, filled with eels, carp, and a few suspiciously motionless trout. The vendor, a sharp-eyed woman with flour-dusted sleeves, is slicing fillets with alarming speed and dropping them into bubbling oil. The oil sizzles, spits, and smells like heaven, assuming heaven smells like garlic, onions, and river fish. The pan she's using is wide and blackened, sitting over a small brick hearth fueled by scrap wood. The batter is simple: flour, maybe some ale or stale wine if she's feeling generous, and herbs to cover up any fishy funk. And that funk is present. You try not to breathe too deeply. You slide a coin onto the wooden plank that passes for her counter and receive a hand-sized portion of fried fish wrapped in, what else? A crust of old bread. It's hot, oily, and crisp on the edges. You take a bite and get that satisfying crunch, followed by a flaky, tender centre. It's not exactly cod, but it's something from the river, and it's better than chewing on another hunk of salt pork. You devour it quickly, licking your fingers like someone who's just remembered soap isn't an option. Fish on Fridays wasn't just a pious gesture, it was a massive cultural force. With the church dictating meatless days, including Wednesdays, Saturdays, and the entire season of Lent, people across Europe were forced to get creative with fish, and fast food vendors seized the opportunity. No cooking fuel at home, no oven, just got off work and need something meat-free and edible before Vespers. Enter the fish fryer. The demand created entire economies. Fishmongers carted their catches into cities daily. Salted herring came in barrels from the North Sea, eels were bred in pits near monasteries. Shellfish was scooped straight from the shore and tossed into stew pots, and while most of it went into home kitchens or abbey cookhouses, a big chunk ended up on carts like this, sizzling in cheap oil and vanishing into the mouths of the working class. And yes, fried fish wasn't new to the medieval world. Romans were deep-frying smelts centuries earlier. But in cities like London, Bruges and Venice, the fried fish stand became a thing, a dependable, quick and relatively affordable option for the poor, the rushed or the spiritually compliant. You stand near the cart for a moment, watching the vendor flick fish fillers into her oil, one by one. A young boy drops off a bucket of fresh river catch and receives a fish head for his trouble, which he chews on without blinking. You hear a woman ask for the crispiest one, which confirms that human nature has not changed in 1,000 years. Everyone wants the corner piece. There's a scholarly debate about how often these fish stalls operated. Some say they were open daily, especially in port towns or near monasteries. Others argue they popped up mostly on religious fasting days, when demand exploded and fish had more market value. It probably varied by region. In coastal cities, fish was common fare. Inland, you might be chewing on something smoked, salted, or halfway to jerky. You take a seat on a low wall and watch as more people arrive. Workers finishing their day, a group of giggling children with coins tied in kerchiefs, even a pair of travelling monks in brown robes with fresh ash on their foreheads. The woman behind the cart greets each with a nod, barely breaking her rhythm as she flips fish and resets the coals. You notice as you nibble the last corner of fried bread that this is a kind of ritual, not just the eating, but the gathering. People line up, eat quietly or chat in soft voices, then move on. No one lingers too long. This is nourishment with a dash of faith. Eat, be grateful, and get back to life. There's also the unspoken rule of fast food speed. The vendor has it down to a science. A few seconds in the oil, a few flicks of salt, a practiced handoff. No delays, no personal questions. You're in and out like a sinner in a confessional. At your elbow, a wiry old man mutters something about last week's carp, which he claims gave him dreams about talking birds. You try not to make eye contact. Fringe fact, certain fish were thought to have spiritual properties, or depending on your source, hallucinogenic ones. Especially in stories where saints ate blessed fish that sang scripture or turned into relics. You're not sure what kind of fish you just ate, but you're hoping for nothing stronger than a nap. Behind you, the bells ring for evening prayer. The vendor starts packing up. The last few fillets are wrapped and handed off, and the pan is pulled from the fire. She sprinkles the coals with water, creating a puff of steam that smells like burnt garlic and fish scales. You sigh, stomach full again, warmed by the simplicity of it all. Maybe it wasn't the cleanest, safest, or even most appetizing experience, but there's something comforting in the rhythm of it. Fried food, hot coals, the press of strangers sharing something sacred and greasy. In another life, you might have stood here every Friday, coin in hand, hoping to get the crispiest one. You stand, wipe your fingers on your cloak, because again, no napkins, and stretch. The market's closing, but the streets are still alive. Somewhere, there's soup bubbling in a cauldron, and a new scent is drifting through the air, something rich, spicy, and unmistakably stewed. You follow it, because in the medieval fast food game there's always another bite waiting around the corner. The scent of broth grows stronger as you move farther into the winding heart of the city, where buildings lean over the street like old friends sharing secrets. It's dusk now, and the air has cooled, but not enough to chase away the smell of simmering soup that floats like a warm cloud between the timber-framed houses. You follow your nose, stepping around a loose cobblestone and nearly tripping over a dog that doesn't care you exist. Then you see it. a heavy iron pot nearly the size of a washtub perched over glowing embers in the centre of a makeshift food stall. The vendor stands beside it, stirring slowly with a wooden paddle so large it could double as a weapon in a tavern brawl. Steam rises in thick waves, smelling of garlic, leeks, and something deeper. Bones, maybe. A line has formed, mostly labourers with soot on their faces and one lanky boy with hands stuffed into his tunic. No one speaks. They're too busy staring into the soup, which seems less like a meal and more like a spell being brewed in front of them. Soup, or pottage as it was often called, was the medieval backbone of fast food. Cheap to make, easy to portion, endlessly variable. It's basically a stew of whatever's available. Vegetables, grains, herbs, leftover scraps of meat if you're lucky. Boiled long enough, it becomes a thick, rib-sticking sludge that tastes better than it looks, and fills you up for a coin or two. Perfect for the hungry, the poor, or anyone whose hearth has gone cold. You step up, hand over a coin, and the vendor dunks a ladle into the pot. The liquid clings like gravy and plops into a thick wooden bowl. He drops in a small wedge of bread, dense and flecked with what might be barley or just dirt, and passes it to you without a word. You nod and step aside. You find a low wall and perch there, cradling the bowl like treasure. The soup is hot, thick, and smells promising. You scoop a bite with the bread and taste onion, pepper, and something earthy. Parsnips, maybe. There's a chewy bit of gristle at the bottom. A lucky find. Protein in any form is a bonus in a dish like this. Interestingly, soup was a culinary equaliser in the Middle Ages. Lords had their own meat-heavy versions, spiced with saffron, and served in gilded bowls, but the base idea was the same. Boil what you've got until it stops being separate ingredients and becomes one cohesive comfort. For the common folk, soup was survival, and when made by a skilled hand, it could be surprisingly tasty. In many towns, these massive communal pots were kept bubbling all day, sometimes even overnight, fed by wood scraps and kitchen refuse. The vendor simply added more ingredients and water as the day went on, turning the same base into something slightly different every hour. In some cases, the pot might go untouched by soap for days or weeks. Why clean what never stops cooking? That's the logic anyway. There's even a quirky term for this, perpetual stew, a kind of forever soup that was never truly emptied, only added to. Some historical sources mention pots that had been kept going for decades, continuously simmering as generations of ingredients and people passed through romantic, a little, unhygienic, absolutely. But in an era without refrigeration, heat was the safest thing you had. You glance around and notice how people are eating. No one uses spoons unless they've brought their own. Most scoop the soup with bread or sip it straight from the bowl. One old man slurps loudly and smacks his lips like he's at a royal feast. It's not about manners, it's about getting warm, fed, and back on your feet before the next bell rings. Behind the stall another pot waits, covered in a cloth. This one smells richer, maybe a special batch for wealthier customers, or just a thicker version saved for later. A young girl peeks inside while the vendor's distracted and gets swatted gently away. You don't blame her. The promise of meat is a powerful motivator. Not all pottage was equal. Some recipes used beans, lentils, even beer. Others added spelt or rye for extra thickness. On feast days you might find pottage laced with chopped bacon or diced chicken. On fasting days it would be fish or plain vegetables, and always the quality depended on who made it and what they had. A talented soup vendor could build a loyal following, not from branding or signage, but from taste alone. Word of mouth was your Michelin star in the 1300s. There's ongoing scholarly debate about whether these vendors were licensed or just tolerated. Some cities enforced strict food regulations. Others turned a blind eye as long as no one dropped dead on the spot. The church sometimes ran charity kitchens, doling out free pottage to the poor. But these weren't always consistent or widespread. For most people, the best soup came from a stranger with a big pot and a good instinct for flavour. You finish your bowl, licking the last traces from the edges like everyone else. It's not gourmet, but it's satisfying, comfort in its most essential form, and as you hand the bowl back you notice something lovely. There's a quiet gratitude shared among the eaters. No one is shoving or shouting, just warm faces, empty bowls, and that small moment of relief you get when hunger has been replaced by something solid and warm in your belly. The vendor nods at you, already ladling soup for the next customer. The fire crackles, the pot bubbles. Life in this corner of the world is held together by broth and bread. You stand and move on, wiping your hands against your tunic as always. The streets are cooling now, lanterns flickering to life in upper windows, but the city doesn't sleep. Not yet. Somewhere out there, someone's pouring ale, slicing onions, stoking coals, because where there are people, there is hunger, and someone clever enough to meet it with a bowl and a ladle. Your footsteps take you toward the edges of the market square again, but this time you're following a sound instead of a scent. A steady clink of mugs, the rumble of laughter, and the low hum of a tune sung slightly off-key by people who've clearly had a bit too much. You round the corner and see them, a line of ale stalls, haphazardly assembled, each lit by a single torch sputtering in the wind. Welcome to the medieval equivalent of a liquid lunch. These stalls aren't elaborate, most are little more than wooden counters on sawhorse legs, shaded by old canvas sheets that flap in the breeze. Barrels stand in clusters behind the stalls, some tapped with wooden spouts, others being rolled or lifted with the grunts of effort from the people manning them, usually women with wide arms and aprons that carry more history than hygiene. Their hands move fast, a coin slapped on the counter, a mug filled with amber liquid, the next customer already waiting before the last one takes a sip. This isn't fine drinking. This is hydration, warmth, calories, and maybe a bit of courage in a mug. You get in line behind a man who smells like horses and fish, a confusing but somehow authentic combination, and when it's your turn, the woman behind the counter doesn't even ask. She fills a ceramic tankard from the nearest barrel and slides it over. It sloshes as you catch it, warm and foamy and sour in that way only medieval ale can be. You take a sip, and it hits like a punch made of bread, herbs and rainwater. No hops here, not yet. Those aren't common until a bit later in history. Instead, the bitterness comes from Groot, a mixture of herbs and flowers that vary from brewer to brewer. Today's tastes like nettle and regret, but you drink it anyway. Ale is the go-to beverage for most medieval people, and not just for fun. It's safer than water, which is often teeming with bacteria from nearby latrines, butcher shops, and basically every animal in the city. Even children drink ale, albeit a weaker version called small beer. It's low in alcohol, easy to produce, and full of nutrients that plain water lacks. You're not drinking to get drunk, though that certainly happens. You're drinking to stay alive. And where there's ale, there's food. You notice it immediately. To your left, a man is munching on something that looks like boiled onions wrapped in cabbage leaves. To your right, a woman is biting into a thick slab of cold roast meat tucked inside a dry barley roll. It's not haute cuisine, but it's portable, and, more importantly, absorbent LA stalls often offer just enough food to keep you upright. Think hard cheese, salted eggs, pickled vegetables, or a chunk of whatever the vendor had left from last night's stew. You buy a small plate of pickled root vegetables for a few coins. They're sour, slightly rubbery, and probably turnips, though you're not convinced you chew anyway, alternating with sips of ale, the burn of the acidity cutting through the ale's musty tang. It's not bad. Actually, it's kind of refreshing. One quirky little fact. Many of these stalls were run by alewives, women who brewed, sold, and served ale right out of their homes or carts. Ale brewing was one of the few professions available to medieval women, especially widows. Some became famous in their neighbourhoods for the strength or flavour of their brew, and yes, their reputation mattered. If your ale went bad, your business dried up faster than your barrel. Of course, not all alewives were saints. Some added water to stretch a batch. Others reused old mash or skipped boiling steps entirely. Complaints were common, and cities tried to regulate quality, issuing licenses, setting prices, even requiring ale tasters to make sure what was being sold wouldn't poison the buyer. Whether those tasters were competent or just looking for a free drink is still up for scholarly debate. The ale you're drinking, it's decent. Stronger than small beer, but not enough to make the cobblestones wobble. You feel a warmth spread through your belly as the second cup goes down, and the crowd around you starts to shift. Laughter gets louder. A man begins playing a small pipe near one of the other stalls, tapping his foot in the puddle beneath him. People sway. Someone tries to sing along and fails. Miserably. You get the sense that these stalls are more than just pit stops. They're social hubs. Here, deals are struck, gossip spreads, lovers meet, fights begin. You hear one man whisper about a merchant cheating the scales, another mumbles about a noblewoman who eats like a peasant. No one speaks loudly, but no one holds back. Ale lubricates the tongue as well as the soul. And in case you were wondering, these stalls don't operate with licenses posted on walls or health scores on display. What keeps them running is reputation and rhythm. Serve too many customers bad drink and you'll find your barrels mysteriously empty, your stall overturned, or your regulars drinking elsewhere. It's fast food, but with stakes higher than Yelp reviews. Sometimes, food vendors were even punished with public humiliation. Pillories, fines, or, in extreme cases, being dunked in rivers to cleanse their filthy trade, all part of the game. You finish your last sip and return the mug. Yes, you return it. Mugs are reused constantly, rinsed if you're lucky, and passed on to the next customer. You try not to think about who drank from it last. The woman behind the counter takes it, nods once, and turns to the next man in line. Night is pressing in now and the stalls are slowly starting to pack up. Some barrels are drained, others are being dragged back home or rolled toward back alleys where they'll be stored, refilled, or simply forgotten until the next market day. You walk away, head buzzing, stomach full of sour ale and questionable vegetables. It wasn't fancy, and it definitely wasn't clean, but it was fast, satisfying, and, if you ignore the lingering taste of turnip brine in your mouth, pretty enjoyable. You feel like you've earned the right to look down on anyone who calls a pint of warm beer at a chain pub authentic. You've had the real thing, served in a cracked mug by a woman who probably brews better than half the breweries in town. You turn another corner and smell something new. It's smoky, charred, and rich with grease. Your stomach, which should be full by now, perks up again. Because in the medieval city, there's no such thing as one dinner. There's always one more bite, one more stall, one more flavour waiting to surprise you. You drift along the edge of the lamplit streets following the scent of something sizzling, something unmistakably meaty and slightly charred. The day crowd has thinned, replaced by a more colourful mix of humanity. Laughing apprentices with ale-bright eyes, cloaked figures with shifty glances, girls in flower-crowned braids, and a man loudly reciting poetry to no one. Welcome to the medieval night market, where dignity goes to bed early and late-night hunger reigns supreme. The food stalls here are different, a little rougher, a little louder. You pass a group of drunk labourers sharing a skewer of what might be kidneys, each taking a bite and passing it down like it's a divine relic. A boy squats near a cart chewing a roasted apple so hot he's blowing steam between bites. And ahead of you, smoke curls from a pit where thick sausages roast on a wire rack, their casings snapping as fat hits open flame. This is where the real street food magic happens. After dark, when the kitchens of polite society shut down, and the workers, wanderers and revellers still want something hot and greasy. The vendors know this. They've kept a few choice items stashed away, things too messy or spicy or frowned upon for daytime trade. After hours, the rules bend a little. Salt, heat, and meat come out swinging. You stop at one of the grills where a heavy-set man with a wild beard is flipping patties of ground meat onto flat iron plates. You ask what it is, and he just grunts. Boar, maybe. You choose not to push him for details. The smell is good, smoky, with hints of garlic, thyme, and charred fat. He slaps the patty between two halves of dense bread, throws in a smear of something pickled, and hands it over. You take a bite. The outside is crispy, the inside tender, and a little chewy in that way that makes you suspicious, but not enough to stop eating. It's rich, greasy, and perfectly satisfying after a day of hard walking and questionable soup. This is medieval fast food in full party mode, a gut bomb with flavour. Around you, the market buzzes with the energy of people unwinding or falling apart. Two minstrels argue about who gets to perform next. A vendor sells tiny cakes soaked in honey and ale. A woman balances 3 trenchers of pottage in one hand, while holding a crying toddler in the other. Somewhere behind you, a couple is kissing like they're in a tragedy. Everyone's a little louder, a little sweatier, and a lot hungrier. And here's something strange but true. Medieval cities had curfews. Bells would toll to mark when people were supposed to be off the streets, tucked safely behind bolted doors. But food stalls like these didn't always listen. Some kept cooking well into the night, especially near brothels, churches or inns where business was never really done. For every official curfew, there was an unofficial feast happening in the shadows. The connection between late-night food and, well, other late-night activities wasn't exactly subtle. Many of these stalls popped up near places of vice, bordellos, gambling halls, ale dens, and offered warm food to people who didn't want to explain why they were out at midnight stew for the sinners, roast chicken legs for the truly exhausted, and always ale. You pause near a cart selling what the vendor swears are spiced lamb sticks. They're dark and crispy, covered in a red powder that burns your nose. You buy one, because of course you do, and the first bite hits like peppered fire. Your mouth goes numb, your eyes water, and you love every second of it. You're not alone. 3 other people nearby are coughing and laughing through the same experience, united by pain and poor decisions. It's in these stalls that innovation quietly brews. Leftovers from the day become stew starters for the night. Bones are charred for flavour, spices are used liberally, when available, and no one asks too many questions. You get fast meals that are often more daring than anything served before sunset. There's a little chaos in the cooking, a little rebellion, and it tastes incredible. One historical curiosity. Some food stalls during festivals and fairs would stay open nearly 24 hours, especially during saints' feast days or carnival seasons. They'd cater to the thousands of pilgrims, partiers and drunk philosophers who wandered city streets well past the midnight bells. There are even accounts of vendors fighting over prime nighttime turf, close to church doors, taverns or gates where pilgrims arrived. Competition didn't sleep. You wipe your mouth on your sleeve, again no napkins, and take a deep breath of the smoky air. You're greasy, slightly buzzed from the ale earlier, and you've had at least 3 things that may or may not contain organ meat, but you feel alive. Not in the fresh air and good exercise kind of way, but in the I just ate something unidentifiable that might be lamb, and I think I'd do it again kind of way. There's something raw and real about these night vendors. They're not trying to impress. They're not here for longevity or legacy. They're here because people are hungry, and food, hot, cheap, fast food, is one of the oldest and most honest transactions in the world. 1 coin, 1 bite, 1 moment of quiet satisfaction. The crowd around you starts to thin. A few stalls have run out of meat and closed their fires. Someone's snoring under a cart. The man who sold you the maybe boar patty waves you off with a nod and douses his coals with a bucket of water. Steam erupts into the night. It smells like fat and wood and ash. You walk on. Behind you, the last of the night market fades into shadows, leaving behind just a trail of crumbs and coals. Ahead, a flicker of lanterns suggests the next chapter of your culinary quest. Because as you're learning, the city never truly sleeps. It just changes flavours. You wake up the next morning, if you can call what just happened sleep, with your mouth dry, your cloak smelling like grilled onions, and a vague memory of arguing with a man over whether your late-night snack was pigeon or rabbit spoiler. It was neither. But there's no time to dwell. The city's alive again, and so are its fast food vendors. This time, though, the morning shift is facing an entirely different kind of challenge, the guilds. You wander into the marketplace again, but something's changed. It's tidier, not clean exactly, let's not get carried away, but organised. The carts are evenly spaced, signs crudely painted in symbols for the illiterate, a fish, a loaf, a knife and spoon crossed like swords, and each vendor wears a small scrap of cloth pinned to their tunic. Some red, some blue. All official. You've stumbled into the regulated part of the food world now, the territory of guild-approved street food, where every meat pie and ladle of broth is technically supervised by someone who wears a robe and writes with a quill. Guilds were the medieval answer to corporate quality control. If you sold bread, you belonged to the Baker's Guild. If you served hot food in the streets, you might fall under the Cook's Guild, or, in some cities, the Pie Maker's Guild. Sounds oddly specific? That's because it was. Medieval cities were obsessed with regulating trades, especially ones that involved feeding people who couldn't afford to sue if things went wrong. You stop at a stall that boasts a neat wooden sign reading, in slightly wobbly Latin, Pistorum Licentia, licensed by the Baker's Guild. The man behind the counter has clean fingernails, suspicious in itself, and a scale beside his bread basket. You ask for a loaf, and he weighs it first, carefully slicing just enough to meet whatever standard is enforced today. You take a bite. It's fine, soft, white, chewy, remarkably clean, almost boring. But that's the whole point. Guild food isn't about surprises, it's about predictability. The bread must weigh a certain amount, the pie must contain the correct amount of meat. The pottage can't have certain forbidden offal bits, which, let's be honest, are probably the tastiest part. These rules, depending on the city, were enforced with surprising strictness. A baker caught shorting customers might be dragged through the streets with his subpar loaves hung around his neck, or worse, thrown in the stocks while pigeons do what pigeons do best. Still, the guilds did more than punish. They trained apprentices, ensured some level of sanitation, a relative term, and protected both vendors and customers from total culinary anarchy. In a time when a tainted pie could kill you, or just ruin your week, the guild mark offered a sliver of peace of mind. You didn't know exactly what you were eating, but you could trust it wouldn't scream when you bit into it. There's a scholarly debate about how much power these food guilds actually had. Some historians argue they were mostly ceremonial by the late Middle Ages, with real power held by city councils or corrupt inspectors who could be paid off with a meat skewer and a wink. Others insist they maintained a strong grip on quality and pricing, especially in times of scarcity. Like everything in the medieval world, it likely depended on the region, the weather, and whether the inspector had eaten breakfast. You move on to a pie stand. Yes, another one. Because this is still the Middle Ages and variety is more theoretical than actual. The woman selling them wears a blue pin from the Cook's Guild and slices her pies with the precision of someone who has memorised how much rabbit is too much rabbit. You order one and bite in. It's good. A little bland. Probably safe. You almost miss the questionable charm of last night's rogue lamb stick. Nearby, a few carts sit just outside the market line, uncertified, unofficial, and probably illegal. Their owners glance around nervously, ready to pack up at the first sign of a city watchman. Their food smells stronger, more herbs, more garlic, probably more flavour, but also more risk. One of the carts even has a small charcoal grill going, with something sizzling that might be liver. You watch a woman buy a skewer, devour it in 2 bites, and wipe her mouth with the inside of her sleeve. Her grin says she doesn't care if it's legal. That's the unspoken truth of guild food. It's safe, but it lacks soul. The real flavour lives just outside the boundaries, in the hands of people too poor to buy membership or too stubborn to follow the rules. Some of them are former guild members kicked out for violations. Others are immigrants or travellers without the right papers. Not that papers were all that organised back then. And some are just chancers, hoping to sell enough stew to get through the week before anyone notices. You circle back to the main drag where a row of licensed vendors ladle out soups, stews, and something called peas pudding, which is somehow worse than it sounds. You try a bowl, thick, gluey, beige. It tastes like someone tried to turn boredom into food, and succeeded. But hey, it's filling, and that's really the goal, isn't it? Medieval fast food wasn't here to thrill, it was here to sustain. The guild-approved stuff, with its standard portions and public inspections, made sure you got calories, not culinary adventures. It's food made for workers who can't afford to gamble with their stomachs. People who need to get back to hauling barrels, cutting wood, or cleaning the privies. You down the last of your pudding, give a courteous nod to the vendor, and wander off. Behind you, a city watchman starts eyeing the edge stall rule breakers. One of them packs up fast, cart creaking as it disappears down an alley. Another stands his ground. The smell of fried cheese wafts over. You consider chasing it, but not yet. For now, you've tasted the order of the medieval food world, the system behind the stew, the structure holding up the skewers, and as comforting as it is, you can't help but miss the grease, the garlic, and the thrill of not knowing whether your next bite will be the best thing you've ever tasted, or a misdemeanor. The alley you slip into next is narrower, dimmer, and somehow louder than the open streets you just left. Voices echo between the stone walls, some cheerful, some angry, and one that sounds suspiciously like someone arguing with a chicken. As you round a corner, the smell hits you first. Sour ale, old onions, and something unmistakably burnt. You've stepped into the unglamorous but very real world of street food gone rogue. Here, fast food isn't just sold, it's hustled. These are the carts and stands that operate without guild approval, outside the watchful gaze of the city inspectors, and sometimes even outside the boundaries of basic decency. It's messy, it's loud, and, if you know where to go, is where the best food lives. But not every vendor plays fair. You find yourself in front of a cart that, on the surface, looks legit. Neatly arranged meat pies sit stacked in a woven basket, steam still curling from the tops. The vendor, a man with a wide smile and teeth like broken tombstones, waves you over and announces loudly that he's got fresh venison. Now, venison is a premium meat game, expensive, the kind of thing nobles hunt and peasants only smell from a distance. Suspicious already, but your stomach makes the decision before your brain catches up. You hand him a coin, he hands you a pie, and you take a bite. It's not venison. You can't say what it is exactly, but it's definitely not deer. It's too fatty, too soft, and there's an aftertaste that whispers of barnyard mystery. You chew slowly, trying to convince yourself it's fine. It's just rustic. Maybe it's goat, maybe rat, maybe it's that chicken from earlier who lost the argument. You glance around and see another customer frowning at their own pie. Then a third. The spell starts to break. In the Middle Ages, food fraud was common enough to earn its own punishments. Selling bad meat, fake meat, or underweight portions could land you in real trouble if you got caught. But getting caught wasn't always guaranteed, especially in the tangle of back streets where inspectors rarely ventured, and where people were often too hungry or too poor to complain. Besides, who are you going to tell? The Bakers Guild? They'd fine you for buying from an unlicensed cart. Some cities did try to enforce justice. In London, vendors who sold spoiled or false goods could be publicly shamed, paraded through the streets with their rotten wares strung around their necks, or worse, forced to eat what they'd sold in front of jeering crowds. One unlucky pie seller in 14th century France was found guilty of stuffing his pastries with dead cats. Yes, cats. His punishment? Being tied to a cart and beaten through the marketplace with his own pies. A lesson in branding, if nothing else. As you finish your definitely not venison pie and try to remember if you're up to date on your medieval digestive prayers, you hear a sudden shout from up the street. A crowd has gathered around a cart. You push through and see the problem instantly. The vendor, a red-faced man with too many rings for someone who sells soup, is being confronted by a woman holding up a bowl of something that looks like gravy. Mush? It's hard to say. She's furious, and the people around her are backing her up. Apparently, he charged full price for what amounts to brown water with a carrot in it. The woman tosses the bowl dramatically into the street, where it lands with a splat and immediate regret for whoever has to walk through that later. In seconds, the confrontation turns into a chorus of complaints. A second man starts shouting about last week's stew being the same one reheated 5 times. Someone else mentions finding a fingernail in their pottage. The vendor defends himself poorly, claiming everything he sells is blessed by the bishop's own cook. No one buys it. It doesn't turn violent, but it gets loud. Eventually a watchman strolls by, drawn by the noise. He looks at the vendor, raises an eyebrow, and mutters something about another citation. The cart is left standing, but customers drift away, whispering. The damage is done. Reputation is everything here, and in the absence of modern reviews, word of mouth is swift and brutal. That's the fragile economy of medieval fast food. If you scam people, you're done. There's no legal protection, no refund policy. Just your name on the street. And if your name becomes a joke, your food cart might as well be firewood. You keep walking, now more cautious. A bread seller offers you a roll that feels suspiciously light for its size. A stew vendor tries to distract you from the smell of his pot by loudly praising the queen. A fishmonger grins too wide and insists that his eels are barely dead. It's a carnival of confidence tricks and culinary roulette. And yet, there's still charm in it. Even in the scams, there's something about the hustle, the performance, the way each vendor sells not just food, but a story. This pigeon came straight from the royal dovecote. This bread was baked in the same oven as the bishop's. This pie will fix your limp. Lays? Maybe, but also sales pitches in a world where exaggeration is half the flavour. You eventually find a small stall run by an old woman with a quiet demeanour and no shouting crowd. Just a bubbling pot of stew, and a few loaves that feel dense and real when you tap them. You buy a bowl, and she hands it over without comment. It smells like lentils, garlic, and something green you can't identify. It's surprisingly good, and you realise this is how the best vendors survive. Not by shouting the loudest, but by being reliable. As you eat, you watch another customer nod to her with familiarity. They've clearly eaten here before. In a world full of grifters and gamble pies, finding a vendor you can trust is the medieval version of a 5-star review. You finish your stew and smile. You've just experienced both sides of the coin, the danger of rogue carts and the quiet glory of the honest seller. You wipe your hands on your already tragic cloak and rise, stomach content. judgment only slightly wounded. Ahead, the market stretches on. More carts, more vendors, more mysteries wrapped in dough. But now you know better. Not all food is good food, and not every smiling face is selling what it claims. But you're still hungry. Always. And there's still one-handed meals, student hangouts, trenches, and monks with cooking fires in your near future. Just don't mention the cat pies again. Ever. You're back in the centre of town now, pushing your way through a lunch rush so thick it feels like you're moving through bread pudding. People jostle past in every direction. Porters with bundles slung over their backs, market wives balancing baskets of fish on their hips, barefoot kids zigzagging through the mess, mouths stuffed with whatever scraps they've managed to grab. The smells swirl together in a dizzying blur of meat, smoke, ale, sweat, and something sweet you can't quite place. And everywhere, absolutely everywhere, people are eating with one hand. That's the unspoken rule of medieval fast food. Portability is everything. Meals aren't leisurely sit-down affairs with embroidered tablecloths and silver spoons. They're quick, efficient, and always ready to move. You eat while walking. You eat while shouting. You eat while watching a juggler accidentally set his sleeve on fire. So it makes sense that the food reflects the pace. Every dish here is designed to be held, handled, and inhaled with as little mess as possible. Well, unless you count the drips running down your wrist, or the constant wiping on your already abused cloak. But that's part of the charm. No forks, few spoons, and absolutely no plates, unless you count a piece of bark or someone else's discarded trencher. You grab what looks like a baked turnover from a woman with a tray slung around her neck. She's walking through the crowd, hawking them like they're royal treasures. Meat and leeks, fresh and hot, she calls, and you believe her because your fingertips are burning through the pastry. The crust is firm enough to hold its shape, but soft enough to bite into without cracking a tooth. Inside, hot leeks and spiced lamb, or possibly mutton, steam against your tongue. It's savoury, greasy, and perfectly sized for your hand. You don't even slow your pace as you chew, and that, you realise, is the point. This is the medieval answer to the modern sandwich. Not always bread-wrapped, but always manageable without cutlery. You see other one-handed meals everywhere you look. Flatbreads topped with egg and herbs, boiled eggs wrapped in sausage, skewers of grilled offal, cheese wrapped in cabbage leaves, dried fruit pies that leave a sticky residue across every knuckle. Some people just carry a hunk of cold roasted meat in one hand and tear pieces off with their teeth while holding a tankard in the other. It's functional, it's fast, and it's also kind of brilliant. Trenchers come into play here too. Thick slabs of stale bread used as plates, bowls, and eventually food themselves. You pass a young boy seated on a barrel, gnawing on a crust so hard he looks like he's trying to sharpen his teeth. His trencher once held beans, judging by the smear across his chin, and now it's his second course. Efficient and edible, if you're not too picky about texture. Interestingly, this preference for handheld food wasn't just about speed, it was about necessity. Workers didn't have time or tools for formal dining. Servants couldn't set out full-place settings every time someone needed to eat, and many homes, especially in poorer districts, didn't have tables at all. So the food adapted, the vendors adapted, everyone adapted. There's a scholarly debate about just how widespread this one-handed eating culture was across medieval Europe. Some argue it was mostly an urban phenomenon, tied to the rhythms of city life, merchants moving between deals, apprentices eating between errands, travellers ducking out of rain under awnings and chewing a meat pie for warmth. Others believe it extended well into rural settings too, especially during harvests or festivals when everyone needed to eat on the go. Either way, the principle holds: if you can eat it with one hand, it has value. You pause at another stand where a vendor is selling boiled eggs and salt from a little wooden tray. You buy one, crack it against the heel of your palm and peel the shell as you walk. A little pinch of salt between your fingers, a bite of egg, and suddenly you feel like 1,000 other people in 1,000 other towns, doing the exact same thing at almost the same time. It's that kind of food, universal, timeless, oddly comforting. Somewhere nearby, a juggler flips 3 apples and a turnip in the air while singing about a bishop's missing cow. A woman walks past with a baby in one arm and a fried cake in the other. A group of stonemasons sit on a plank of wood between 2 barrels, passing a wheel of cheese and laughing about someone named Henry, who apparently fell into a privy. You can't help but grin. The food culture here is fast because the lives here are fast. Fast in the sense that time slips through your fingers like flour on a breeze. You don't know how many meals you'll get. You don't know what work waits for you. You don't even know if the fish you ate yesterday was fish. So when the food appears, hot, simple, one-handed, you take it. You eat, you move. There's even a quirky little detail that's been recorded in old cookbooks and guild notes. Vendors often designed their meals to fit inside pouches. Yes, pouches. The literal medieval lunchbox. Think pies shaped to sit neatly in a satchel, or pressed cakes that wouldn't crumble on horseback. A knight could draw his sword with one hand and his dinner with the other. You stop at a stall selling these pouch-perfect hand pies, triangular things stuffed with apples and cheese. You buy one and tuck it into your belt just because, in case of emergencies, or second lunch. By now the sun's high, the market's roaring, and your hand is smeared with flour, onion grease and salt. But you don't care. You're fed, full, and exactly where you're supposed to be. In the middle of a city too loud to sleep and too hungry to sit still. One hand for your food, one hand for the rest of life. That's the rhythm of this place. Fast, messy, delicious. And you're just getting started. The street widens, sloping downhill toward what looks like a stone gate, and beyond that, a tangle of rooftops and bell towers in the distance. But you're not leaving the city. Not yet. Because just before the road curves out of view, a noise grabs your attention. Shouting, singing, a low mutter of Latin you definitely can't translate, and the unmistakable whine of a lute being played far too enthusiastically. It's not a tavern this time. It's louder, rowdier, and judging by the scattered apple cores and puddles of spilled ale, considerably messier. You've wandered into a university town. The buildings here are narrow and tall, plastered in that half-timbered leaning-on-your-neighbour sort of way that makes you question their structural integrity. Under one window, a student dangles a leg while reciting poetry to a bored cat. A few feet away, a robed figure is dozing beside a cart piled high with half-eaten bread loaves, and in the centre of it all, a food stand surrounded by the loudest, hungriest and most chaotic bunch of medieval students you'll ever see. It's noon, and the lunch rush is in full swing. These are not the silent scholars of dusty old books. These are boys and young men fresh from lectures on Aristotle, now elbow-deep in a shared tray of fried cheese and onion pastries. They're arguing about theology one second, insulting each other's Latin the next, and stuffing their faces in between. One shouts over his shoulder for more ale. Another leans across a stranger's meal to grab a plum from a nearby tray. It's a riot of academic gluttony. University towns in the Middle Ages were known not just for their scholarship, but for their incredible ability to generate hangry mobs of students at all hours. Oxford, Paris, Bologna. They were all academic powerhouses, yes, but also wild party zones filled with underfed, overeducated young men desperate for cheap food and cheaper drink. The fast food stalls in these areas adapted accordingly. You approach the stand cautiously, already clocking at least one overturned bowl and a suspicious puddle you'd rather not think about. The vendor is older, sharp-eyed, and clearly used to the chaos. He doesn't even flinch when a student smacks into the side of his cart mid-argument. Instead, he slaps a hand pie onto the wood surface with a thud and shouts, "Next!" You step up and ask for what they're all eating. "Cheese and leek pasty," he grunts, already grabbing another, "and dried plum tart, but I'm out of the tart, and the plums." You nod, pay, and take the pasty. It's warm, golden, and slightly lopsided. One bite in, and you're met with a rich, salty cheese, and just enough oniony bite to make your eyes water. The crust is thick and holds everything together, ideal for walking, talking, or arguing about logic while spitting crumbs. Scholars in this period were often from wealthy families, but they lived like paupers while studying. Cheap meals from food stalls like this kept them going between lectures and, often, between brawls. Yes, brawls. It wasn't uncommon for students to riot, sometimes over food prices, sometimes over exams, sometimes just because someone said their professor smelled like turnips. These little stands, ground zero for student life. And here's a quirky fact. Some university towns had rules banning students from eating in certain taverns or food stalls, claiming it led to moral corruption, as if a greasy leek pasty and a mug of warm ale could turn someone into a heretic. Then again, looking at the current crowd, 3 of whom are drunkenly reenacting a scene from Virgil, while throwing bread at a stray dog, you can see their point. There's a debate among historians about how organised these university food vendors actually were. Some say they operated under strict guild laws just like in the rest of the city. Others argue that student neighbourhoods were more lax, with unofficial vendors setting up wherever students clustered. Either way, the food had to be fast, affordable and edible, even if that last part was negotiable. You sit on a nearby step to finish your pasty and watch the show. One student is trying to impress a group by balancing a pie on his head while quoting Cicero. Another is asleep face down in a trencher of something once resembling stew. The vendor doesn't care. He's already serving the next round, his hands moving like clockwork. Next to you, a student offers you part of his own snack, a greasy little ball of fried dough filled with, he says, mashed figs and honey. You take a bite. It's cloyingly sweet, sticky, and tastes like something that probably qualifies as dessert and medicine. He grins and explains that it was left over from the bakery's earlier batch and sold for half-price students, it turns out. Nowhere to find deals, and they absolutely know how to stretch a meal. Behind you, a small group of students has gathered around a makeshift table, a board resting on 2 barrels. They're dividing up a platter of sausages and eggs with pocket knives, drinking weak wine out of a shared flask and laughing at something in Latin that you're probably better off not understanding. You rise, tossing your pasty wrapper, a strip of leftover parchment, into a nearby gutter. The vendor is still shouting orders, and the students are still eating like they haven't seen food in days, which, depending on how their studies have gone, might be true. There's something oddly modern about it all. The messy charm of a university town hasn't changed in centuries. Loud debates, chaotic meals, questionable hygiene, and food that walks the line between quick snack and digestive risk. Only now you're experiencing it with your feet in the mud and a mouthful of leek. You move on, ducking to avoid a flying apple core and stepping over a student asleep on the curb. Somewhere nearby, a bell tolls, signalling the next round of lectures, or maybe vespers, or maybe just time for more pie. Either way, the food stalls don't care, they'll be here, serving handheld meals to scholars, brawlers and passers-by alike. Because hunger, like education, never really stops. The day rolls on, and with it the scents in the air begin to shift. The smoky haze of roasted meat gives way to something subtler, floral, peppery, warm. You pass by a spice merchant's booth, a table covered in sacks and jars filled with deep red powders, golden threads, and tiny dark seeds that smell like licorice and heat. He's surrounded by curious onlookers, and not just because he's shouting that his saffron can cure melancholy and bad dreams. He's part merchant, part showman, and entirely aware that in a city this hungry, flavour sells. You stop to watch as he pinches a few strands of saffron and tosses them into a pot of bubbling broth. The colour changes instantly, golden, almost glowing. The scent deepens. A nearby boy actually moans. You'd roll your eyes, but honestly you get it. And suddenly, you realise how deep the spice game runs in this world. Even in a time when most people eat whatever they can get, there's still a place for flavour, especially in fast food. You move along to a small cart tucked between 2 buildings, barely more than a plank on wheels. A woman with arms dusted in flour is selling fried meatballs, crisp on the outside, glistening with oil and flecked with spices you can't quite name. You order one, and she hands it over on a square of dried bark. The first bite nearly knocks you back. Coriander, cumin, maybe cinnamon? The meat is tender, almost sweet, but with a heat that lingers on your tongue. You chew slowly, stunned that something sold from a back alley cart tastes like it came from a royal kitchen. The woman gives you a brief nod, like she knows exactly how good it is, and moves on to the next customer. This is the quiet truth of medieval street food. The spice trade changed everything. It wasn't just about flavour, it was about status, power, and the slow burn of cultural collision. Spices came from far-off places, India, Persia, the Levant, even parts of Africa. And by the 12th and 13th centuries they were flowing into Europe like liquid gold, expensive, yes, but also addictive. Of course most of it went to the rich. Nobles sprinkled cinnamon on their roasted birds, poured ginger into their ale, and paid absurd amounts of money for just a few threads of saffron. But even in the alleys and open-air kitchens of the poor, spice found a foothold. Because spice, when used right, let vendors stretch cheap food into something spectacular. Take that meatball, for example. It probably wasn't made with high-quality beef. It might not even be all meat. But add the right mix of cloves and coriander, and suddenly no one cares what part of the animal it came from. Spice was the great equalizer. And in fast food, it was also the great distractor. One quirky fact: some medieval street vendors made spice blends the way others make sauces, custom mixes passed down like heirlooms. A stew vendor might add nutmeg to mask the flavour of aging mutton. A pie seller might blend pepper and vinegar to create a sauce tucked inside the crust. And no two blends were the same. You weren't just buying food, you were buying someone's secret recipe, their signature, their legacy. Of course, there's a catch. Spices were expensive. Really expensive. So how did so many fast food vendors afford them? Here's the trick. They used just enough to tease the palate, never enough to bankrupt themselves. A pinch here, a thread there. Some even mixed true spice with local substitutes. Horseradish for mustard, dried herbs for pepper, burnt breadcrumbs for colour. It was a constant game of balance. Flavour versus cost. Illusion versus honesty. There's debate among historians about how accessible spice truly was to the working class. Some argue that most poor folk rarely tasted anything beyond salt and vinegar. Others point to urban vendors, especially in major trade cities like Venice, London or Bruges, where small amounts of spice were accessible enough to appear in daily meals, if only in trace amounts. Maybe it wasn't common, but it was possible. And in food history, that distinction matters. As you chew your way through the last of the spice meatball, you notice other vendors jumping on the flavour train. A woman is selling almond pastries dusted with cinnamon. A fish vendor tosses ginger and black pepper onto his grilled catch, yelling that it's seasoned like a king's supper. A group of children are sharing what looks like sticky date balls, each rolled in a fine white powder, probably sugar, possibly powdered lies. Either way, they're giggling too hard to care. You buy a small honey cake from a man with gold-stained fingers. He winks and says it's made with rosewater and cloves. You bite in, and the floral scent wraps around your nose like incense. The taste is sweet, but layered. More than just sugar, it's complex, almost decadent. You pause for a moment, cake in hand, watching the scene unfold. Food vendors shouting, spices sizzling, customers swaying between meals like bees drunk on scent. There's something theatrical about it. These aren't just meals, they're performances. The spice, the smell, the colour, they're part of the show, a way to catch your attention, hold it, and take your coin before you even realise your mouth's watering. And for a brief saffron-scented moment you forget you're in a world without refrigerators, with open sewers, where meat might have been hanging in the sun for 3 hours. All you know is that someone somewhere figured out how to make a lentil cake taste like a festival, and you're better for it. You wipe your fingers on the hem of your tunic. At this point it's more napkin than clothing. And take a deep breath. The air is thick with spice and smoke, and for the first time all day you don't feel hungry. You feel enchanted. Flavour, it turns out, isn't just for the rich. Not here, not today, and definitely not when you've got one coin, one hand, and a street full of vendors who know how to turn heat and herbs into a little slice of heaven. You slow your steps now, belly full of meatballs, honey cake, and a hint of cloves still ghosting your tongue. The streets seem quieter for a moment, the city catching its breath between the midday rush and the slow build toward evening. But even in this lull, there are still carts to discover, still vendors tucked into corners, their offerings less flashy than saffron-glazed pastries, but somehow more intriguing. You find one under a faded cloth awning, the kind that's patched so many times it's more thread than fabric. A man stands behind a wooden crate, and beside him sits a tray of food that looks challenging. A pile of small blackened things glistening with oil and vinegar, coiled, boneless and glum-looking. Next to them, a basket of skewers, bits of greyish meat, each one skewered on a splintered stick. No one's crowding this stall. There's no scent of baking bread or caramelizing onions, just the raw, briny funk of water and guts and centuries-old habits. Welcome to the fringe zone of medieval fast food. Today's special: eels, livers, and other dubious delights. You hesitate. The vendor grins, revealing a single gold tooth. He picks up a skewer and offers it with the casual confidence of a man who knows you're too curious not to try it. You give him a coin and take it, lifting it warily to your nose. It smells metallic, earthy. Not bad, just odd. You bite. The texture hits first, firm but soft like meat that's lost its identity in the fire. Then the taste, iron, fat, and a burst of vinegar. It's liver, or close enough, and it's not terrible. You chew slowly, telling yourself it's good for you, that people have eaten worse, and they definitely have. Offal, organ meats, and eel weren't fringe by medieval standards. They were survival food. Not just cheap cuts, but often the only cuts accessible to anyone below the noble class. These parts didn't go to waste. If it came out of an animal and wasn't bones or horns, it had a culinary destiny. And in a world where nothing came easy, people got creative. Eels, in particular, were wildly popular, not because they were delicious, though to some they were, but because they were everywhere. River eels, swamp eels, eels in barrels, dried eels, jellied eels, rich in fat, easy to preserve, and, here's the theological loophole, considered acceptable on fast days by the church. Because they lived in water, they counted as fish, technically. You pick up one of the coiled eels now, daring yourself. It's been stewed in something sharp, maybe vinegar and herbs. You bite the edge. The skin is chewy, but the flesh inside is soft and oily. Not amazing, but weirdly satisfying. The vendor watches with an amused expression, as if he's seen 1,000 people have this exact internal battle. You nod, finish the bite, and surprise yourself by reaching for another skewer. Organ meats were common too. Livers, kidneys, hearts, even brains. Either chopped into pies, grilled on open flames, or turned into makeshift sausages with generous amounts of herbs and garlic. Not for the weak of stomach, maybe, but beloved by those who couldn't afford to waste anything. Waste was for kings. The rest of the world had to chew carefully and hope for the best. There's a legend, half-whispered by food historians, about a medieval fair in which a vendor sold blood pudding so rich in flavour that people lined up to eat it without asking what was in it. The ingredients? Pig's blood, oats, onions, and mystery bits. It was declared a hit, then banned for being too successful without proper oversight, which says a lot about both the food and the regulation. Now, of course, not everyone was on board with these culinary choices. Some religious groups saw offal as unclean, or at least suspect. Others viewed it as peasant food, too low class to appear on noble tables. But plenty of monks, soldiers, and hungry workers couldn't care less about the stigma. Food was food, protein was protein, and if it kept your hands steady and your stomach full, what did it matter where it came from? There's an ongoing academic debate about whether offal dishes were more common in urban or rural settings. Some believe the cities saw more of it, since butchers there had to do something with the leftovers. Others argue that country folks closer to the animals made better use of every part. But the truth is probably both. Offal turned up wherever meat was scarce, which meant everywhere, all the time. You finish the skewer and take a swig of water from a nearby barrel. It's flavoured with lemon peel and mint, probably to mask whatever was floating in it last week. You're starting to notice a pattern. Medieval people knew how to cover their culinary sins. Spices, herbs, vinegar, smoke. It's not just flavour, it's camouflage. A strategy as much as a recipe. As you step back into the street, you see a boy selling something on a stick that looks suspiciously like a fried rat. You decide not to investigate, your stomach has limits. And besides, there's a group of children chewing dried fishtails on a bench nearby, each one crunching the bones like crisps. You smile. They look happy enough. The fringe food has its own loyal fans. Not everyone wants a saffron-scented stew or a pastry shaped like a goose. Some want the chewy comfort of liver, the fatty slick of eel, or the crisp char of a kidney that's spent just a little too long over a flame. And for them, these carts deliver. You walk on, a little queasy, but weirdly proud. You've eaten the kind of food most people avoid. You've braved the unidentifiable, the undervalued, the underbelly of the medieval menu, and while you might not crave eel again anytime soon, you've earned a badge of honour among the market regulars. Because in a world where nothing's wasted and every part gets cooked, the question isn't what is it. It's will it make you full? You've passed more pies than you can count today. Some sweet, some suspicious, some still steaming, and a few that look like they could double as weapons. But now you're drawn in by something altogether different. The cart you approach isn't boasting flavour. It isn't sizzling or perfumed with saffron. In fact, it doesn't even smell like much. But it looks odd, bizarre even. Because instead of wooden bowls or paper-thin wrappers, this food is being served in what appears to be a loaf of bread, a stale one no less. Trencher, the vendor says before you even ask. Keeps your fingers clean, fills your belly twice. You nod, take the offered slab and study it. It's a thick disc of old bread. Rough, brown, and more square than round, with a scoop of pottage ladled right onto it. The bread has a spongy middle, sunken slightly from the weight of the hot stew, but the outer crust is tough enough to withstand a battering. You pick it up carefully, bite into the middle, and get a mouthful of savoury lentils and barley, followed by the dense chew of the bread below. It's not elegant, it's not even good exactly, but it's honest, and more than that, it's genius. Trenchers were the medieval answer to the problem of plates, mainly that plates were expensive, fragile, or simply unavailable. Who needs pottery when your bowl can be eaten afterward? Or more commonly, when your plate doubles as tomorrow's breakfast. The bread used for trenchers was typically yesterday's bake, dry, heavy, and thick enough to soak up broth without falling apart. Some were round, others square, often stacked on a board or napkin, then used as literal dinnerware. And when you were done eating, you could either chew it, toss it to a dog, or give it away as alms. In noble households, trenchers were actually left behind, intentionally. Once the meat and gravy had soaked into them, they'd be gathered and donated to the poor leftovers from the Lord's table, might feed 20 hungry mouths. But out here in the streets, you get the whole package, hot food and the soggy dish that comes with it. No waste, no washing up, just carbs on carbs. You find a quiet spot to eat. Well, quieter than usual. A low stone wall near a stable, where the scent of horses is only slightly worse than the aftertaste of the eel you bravely tried earlier. You settle in with your trencher and marvel at how efficient it is. Every part has a purpose. Even the crust, once you chew through the first rock-hard layer, is edible. Kind of. You wouldn't call it tender, but in this world that's not the goal. The goal is sustenance. Fill the belly, fuel the body, keep moving. Some vendors even specialise in trenchers, not the stew. They buy stale bread from bakers, stack them high, and sell them with a rotating menu of fillings. Onion and beans in the morning, beef drippings at midday, maybe a little salted fish by nightfall. Sometimes it's fresh, sometimes it's 3 days old with a little extra vinegar to disguise the age. Either way, it's a miracle of form and function. There's a curious historical fact buried in the records of several large towns. Trenchers were so common that laws had to be passed about how thick they must be, especially when used in taverns. If the bread was too thin, it would collapse. Too thick, and it was basically just another loaf with stew dumped on top. There were complaints, letters, a scandal or two. The politics of bread, as it turns out, were not to be taken lightly. You finish the contents of your trencher and gnaw at the edges. The broth has soaked through just enough to soften the middle, though the corners still fight you like you're trying to chew through old armour. A passing dog eyes you hopefully. You toss him one chunk and he devours it without hesitation. Smart dog. There's also a soft debate among scholars about how widespread the use of trenchers really was. Were they used mainly by the lower classes? Were they a tavern staple, or just a street food workaround? Some argue trenchers were common at every level of society, just with different fillings and breads. Others suggest they were more a working class solution, born out of necessity. The evidence is piecemeal, literally. But one thing's clear, they were everywhere. You spot a young couple nearby sharing a trencher topped with what smells like egg and cheese. They're eating it like a pizza, each tearing off opposite sides, trying not to drip on each other. It's oddly romantic in a peasant chic kind of way. Another vendor nearby stacks her trenchers into towers and tops them with fried apples, cinnamon and honey, dessert trenchers. You watch a group of children tear them apart, sticky-fingered and squealing with delight one manages to get honey in his hair. No one seems concerned. And then there's the travelling monk selling pilgrim trenchers, simple bread with lentils and a prayer. He hands them out to passers-by for free, murmuring blessings in Latin. You take one, because why not? A free meal with a side of spiritual insurance sounds like a good deal. It's dry, but humble, a taste of virtue. What's fascinating is how trenchers blur the line between tool and food. They're part utensil, part ingredient, part packaging. In a time before paper wraps, disposable spoons, or reusable containers, they solved a dozen problems with one loaf of stale bread. And somehow, even centuries later, the logic holds up. It's basically the medieval equivalent of a bread bowl, a wrap, and a biodegradable plate all in one. You lick the last bit of broth from your fingers and stretch, full again, satisfied in that uniquely medieval way, where your teeth ache slightly from chewing, your jaws sore, but your stomach's calm. You stand, brush off the breadcrumbs and move on. The street is coming alive again, Evening's creeping in and the bells are tolling faintly in the distance. Somewhere, someone's roasting chestnuts. You smell it on the breeze. But first, maybe something to drink. Because trenches are a meal, yes, but they also make you thirsty, especially when half the crust is still working its way through your digestive system, like a stone in a sock. Still, you can't help but admire the simplicity. Bread as a bowl, a tool that becomes a treat. You smile. Welcome to the future of dining, 13th century style. You follow the drifting smell of something toasty and herbal now, the light dimming as you cross into a quieter part of town. It's not silence exactly. There's still the clatter of hooves, the rustle of carts, the murmur of voices carried through narrow alleys, but the chaos of the central market has thinned. Here, you notice more stone buildings, less shouting. A carved wooden cross leans above a doorway, and somewhere behind thick walls, a bell tolls gently. Not the clanging of commerce, but something softer, slower. You've stumbled into the shadow of a monastery. You might not think of monks as fast food types. Quiet, cloistered, celibate men with tonsures and long robes. What would they know about quick meals? But that's the trick. Medieval monasteries didn't just pray and copy manuscripts. They fed people, a lot of people, and often they did it fast. Outside the gate, a small group waits beside a low wooden bench where a large cauldron steams over a brick fire. A novice, young, red-faced and visibly sweating under his coarse robe, tends the pot with one hand and doles out portions with the other. No one pays, no one argues. They simply hold out bowls or flat rounds of bread and receive ladlefuls of thick lentil stew, or in some cases just the broth with scraps. Monastic charity kitchens were the hidden gears of many medieval towns. While merchants sold food and taverns made their coin, monasteries gave it away, fast, hot, and humbly made. Not just to the destitute, but to pilgrims, travellers, the sick, and anyone who showed up hungry. For all the church's wealth and corruption, many religious orders took their vows of service seriously. Feeding the poor wasn't just good PR. It was salvation work. You step closer, and the novice eyes you, then gestures silently with the ladle. You nod, hand him a wooden bowl you borrowed earlier from a tavern and never returned. Don't worry, everyone does it. And he fills it with something beige and bubbling. You find a spot against the wall, sit cross-legged and dip in. The stew is simple, lentils, garlic, maybe a trace of celery or root vegetable. Salted enough to bring out flavour but not overwhelm it. You chew slowly. It's not spiced, not luxurious, but it's soothing. It tastes honest. A meal made without ambition or flair, but with care. Around you, the crowd is silent. A pair of elderly women eat with bowed heads. A boy with a ragged tunic slurps from his trencher, wiping his nose on his arm between bites. No one here is talking about spices or complaining about texture. They're just eating, thankful for what's warm and real. Monks had set meal times, strict dietary rules, and often observed fasts and feasts with rigid discipline. But when it came to the charity kitchens, the approach was different. You didn't need to follow the rule of St. Benedict to earn a bowl of barley soup. You just needed to be hungry, and for many travellers, that bowl might be the only meal they'd get all day. Pilgrims on the road to shrines, Canterbury, Santiago, or local holy sites, depended on monastic food as much as they did on the blessing of saints. A quick stop at a priory could mean bread, stew, and a night under shelter. No coin required, just a blessing mumbled over your head, and a warning not to steal the spoons. A fringe historical fact. Some monasteries became so famous for their food that they started drawing pilgrims as much for the soup as for the relics. One abbey in the Low Countries was known for a cabbage stew so rich and creamy that people wrote about it in letters. Divinely hearty, one traveller said, and possibly more comforting than the bones of St. Agnes. Take that, Agnes. Of course, not all monk-run kitchens were equal. Some were basic gruel pits, churning out slop with more water than grain. Others were remarkably well organised, with rotating menus depending on the season. Fish during Lent, chickpeas and herbs in spring, root vegetables in winter, and always, always bread. Bread so coarse it made your jaw ache, but still, it was bread. There's a scholarly debate about just how much monasteries influenced local food culture. Some say they simply fed the needy and vanished behind their walls. Others argue their food shaped the tastes of the surrounding towns, especially when former novices opened their own taverns or cookshops, with the recipes they'd learned in the cloister. You can believe either side, but as you sip your lentil broth under a stone crucifix, it's clear that at least here, in this town, the monks matter. You finish the bowl and hand it back. The novice gives you a brief, tired nod, then returns to his pot. His robes are splashed with stew. His hands are cracked. He's clearly been ladling for hours. You resist the urge to say anything. This isn't a place for chit-chat, it's a place where food speaks and silence agrees. Before you leave, you notice a small line forming again. People who missed the earlier serving, or who were too proud to join it until their stomachs growled loud enough. Among them is a woman with a baby on her hip and a shepherd with mud up to his knees. No one is turned away. The monastery itself looms behind the cart, its heavy doors closed, its windows dark. You wonder what the monks inside are eating. Probably the same stew, maybe with a bit more salt. Maybe not. In many orders, the monks themselves ate no better than the people they served. As you walk away, the noise of the city returns. Metal clanging, horses neighing, vendors shouting about pies again. The monastery fades behind you, just another building in a city of corners and smoke. But there's something grounded in you now, a memory of quiet charity, of food served without price or pride. It might not be the flashiest meal of your medieval food tour, but it lingers the longest. Sometimes, the fastest food is the one that comes without question, and sometimes the best meal is the one you didn't know you needed. The road pulls you in again, winding out from the quiet monastery lane and back toward the pulsing centre of the city, where something has changed. The energy is bigger, brighter, and louder, impossibly louder. Bells clang not just from churches but from carts, stalls, and the hands of children running wild through the crowd. Music drifts in from all sides, drums, pipes, a lute being plucked within an inch of its life. You've stumbled into a medieval festival, and it's less a celebration and more a sensory ambush. Crowds swarm every corner of the open square. There are jugglers tossing apples with dramatic flair, dancers stomping in rhythm on planks laid over the mud, and men in masks heckling passers-by for coins. You hear the jangle of tambourines and the bark of a dog trained to walk on its hind legs for scraps. Overhead, streamers flap in the breeze, their faded colours catching the sun. But more than anything, more than the noise, the chaos, the swirl of motion, what hits you hardest is the smell. Meat. So much meat. It's in the air, drifting thick as fog, smoky, fatty, sweetened with something that smells like burnt sugar and beer. You follow the scent through the crowd like a divining rod, weaving past revellers in flower crowns and jesters in bells, until you reach the source, a spit nearly as long as a wagon, mounted over a pit so deep it radiates heat like a forge. And on that spit, rotating slowly, is an entire pig, crackling, blistered, golden, dripping with fat into the flames below. You join the crowd clustered around the fire, eyes wide, stomach already making promises your dignity can't keep. A man in a red doublet swings a cleaver with theatrical gusto, carving slabs from the roast and slapping them onto trenchers. The line moves fast. This is festival food, meant to be eaten standing, spilled on your tunic and remembered for years. You get your portion, a hunk of roasted pork blackened at the edges and still steaming. It's topped with a sauce so tangy it makes your eyes water, and served with a skewer of root vegetables so perfectly charred they taste like something invented for campfire royalty. You bite in, and the world goes quiet for a moment. Crisp skin, tender meat, sharp vinegar cutting through the fat. This is not your everyday stew. Festivals like this were food feasts first and everything else second. Sure, they marked saints' days, royal visits, or harvests, but everyone really came for the food whole oxen roasted in the square. Fish stews boiled in cauldrons big enough to drown in. Cakes shaped like animals. Jellied meats moulded into towers. And ale, gods, the ale, poured from barrels stacked taller than your average peasant. Vendors travelled miles to sell at these gatherings, bringing their best and weirdest dishes. Some cooked on site, others lugged pre-made goods wrapped in linen and hope. And the competition? Brutal. You spot a sausage vendor loudly mocking the neighbouring pie stall, calling their crust as soft as a bishop's handshake. The pie seller retaliates with a tray of steaming venison pies, tossing samples like holy relics to the crowd. It's delicious warfare. A group of musicians sets up behind you, launching into a melody that sounds like someone trying to charm a snake with a headache. You shuffle away with your pork and find a quieter corner near a stand selling festival skewers, bite-sized pieces of meat, onions and dried plums roasted over a brazier. You try one, not because you're still hungry, but because this kind of day doesn't come often. The meat is sweet, sticky, and so hot it almost blisters your tongue. And it's not just meat. There are sweets too. Honey cakes fried in oil, sold by a woman with cinnamon in her hair, and a smile like she knows something you don't. You buy one, and it's exactly what you'd hoped for. Crispy on the outside, warm and molten inside, sugar clinging to your fingers like a second skin. You lick it off without shame. A fun fringe fact. During major festivals, cities often relaxed food regulations. That meant vendors could sell outside the usual guild system, sometimes without licenses, sometimes with ingredients considered excessive during normal times. It was a brief, glorious escape from rules and rations. For a few days, even peasants ate like nobles, at least until their coin ran out or the meat turned. There's even scholarly speculation that some festival foods were experimental, new recipes tested on big crowds to see what would stick. If you liked your meat with fruit, great. If not, someone else would finish it. It was culinary chaos, and vendors weren't afraid to take risks. You could try almond paste moulded into swans, or stuffed pastries filled with something labelled only as forest bird. You don't ask. At one stall, a group of teenagers is selling laughing cakes, allegedly made with herbs that tickle the belly. You don't try one. You've had enough belly tickling today, thank you very much. Still, the crowd buying them seems thrilled, possibly also hallucinating. It's hard to tell in this light. Somewhere behind you, a man begins to sing about a roast goose that betrayed him. You decide it's time to walk. As you wander, soaking in the sights and smells, you notice something remarkable. No one's sitting. Everyone is eating on their feet, moving, talking, living. It's medieval fast food at full volume. No chairs, no tables, just hands, mouths and motion. Trenchers double as plates, skewers double as cutlery. And if it spills, that's what your sleeves are for. You finish your honey cake and brush the crumbs from your chin. Your tunic is officially a disaster. A glorious, sticky, smoky disaster. But you're grinning. Because at a festival, food isn't just sustenance. It's theatre. It's celebration. It's the one time no one cares where it came from or what's in it. Only that it's hot, fast, and makes you feel like a king, even if only for a few minutes. You step aside to let a group pass. A woman balancing 3 mugs of ale, a child chewing on a sausage longer than his arm, and a monk singing a hymn through a mouthful of pie. It's perfect. You've barely made it past the roasted pig remnants and honey cake wreckage when you notice something you hadn't before. Not the smell of fresh bread, which has been haunting your nose for hours. Not the smoke curling from grills or the chant of minstrels demanding coins for songs you didn't ask to hear. No, this time it's something quieter. A voice. Low, firm, practiced. Not calling out in desperation, but in command. Pies. Fresh and hot. No guessing games. What's inside is what you get. That alone makes you stop. Honesty? From a street vendor? Now that is rare. The voice belongs to a woman standing behind a simple wooden stall, her sleeves rolled to the elbows, her hair pulled back with a piece of twine. She looks practical, unbothered, and entirely in control. On the stall are rows of meat pies, perfectly uniform, their edges sealed with careful pinches, a small carved symbol on top of each, one for pork, one for fish, one for egg and cheese. Behind her, a girl about 10 years old fans the coals beneath a small brazier, while another child is vigorously kneading dough on a stone slab. You've just met one of the unsung pillars of medieval street food, the female vendor. While taverns and guild kitchens often leaned male, the streets, especially the corners, the alleys, the stalls pressed up against tenement walls, were the domain of women, widows, wives, daughters, mothers. If a man died, his wife might take over the food cart to survive. If a family needed extra coin, it was the women who turned the front room of their home into a bakery or pie shop. In many cases, they were the best cooks around. And they did it fast, cheap, and without apology. You step forward and ask for a pork pie. The woman nods once, doesn't look up, just grabs one off the tray and hands it over. It's still warm. You take a bite, and the crust flakes just slightly before giving way to a savoury filling. Salted, peppered, and definitely pork, just like she said. No mystery bits. No rabbit in disguise. Just straightforward, honest food. Around you, a quiet rhythm has formed. The woman bakes, the girls prepare, and the line of customers shifts steadily. There's no shouting, no street barker antics, just efficient practice service. It's oddly calming, and maybe that's why the line keeps growing. In some towns, women weren't just vendors. They ran the entire food operation in certain districts. Pie women, cake wives, and ale wives were known by name. Some became local legends, famous for their roast goose or honey cakes. Others were feared, mostly by their competitors. And while they didn't always have guild protection, they had something better: reputation. One fringe record from the 14th century York mentions a woman named Marjorie, who sold eel pie so popular that 3 rival vendors filed complaints accusing her of dishonest magic. Whether she used sorcery or just added extra pepper is unknown, but the city records show she kept her stall, and the others mysteriously stopped selling pies soon after. But it wasn't always easy. These women walked a tightrope between respect and suspicion. Too successful, and people whispered about witchcraft; too assertive, and the men running the city took offence. There were rules, fines, even physical punishments for selling outside the approved hours or stepping into guild-controlled turf, and yet they kept working. Because food doesn't wait for bureaucracy, and neither does a hungry crowd. The girl fanning the coals coughs and shifts her position, her hands expertly adjusting the pan above the flames. You realise she's no apprentice, she's part of the business. The woman speaks to her without looking. "More fish pies ready?" The girl nods, then grabs a handful of dough and starts shaping. It's a family affair. Many of these stalls weren't just solo acts. They were family-run machines. Siblings making dough, daughters grinding spices, mothers managing coins and customers. Fast food wasn't just a meal. It was a livelihood passed down generation to generation, with recipes whispered between bites and secrets encoded in spice. There's debate, of course, about how free these women really were. Some historians argue that female vendors had more economic independence than most women of their time, earning their own coin, managing stock, and negotiating with customers. Others say it was survival, not freedom, and that most profits went to male relatives or landlords. Probably both are true, depending on the city, the year, and the woman herself. You buy a second pie, this one marked with a simple fishbone carved on top. Inside, it's chopped white fish with parsley, vinegar, and something tangy you can't name. It's briny, rich, and perfect for eating while walking. Which you do, nodding to the girl as you leave. She doesn't smile, just returns to kneading. Business never stops. Farther down the lane, another female-run stall is selling fried flatbreads dusted with honey and caraway. The vendor is older, with grey hair and arms like rolling pins. She slaps the dough onto the grill without looking, flips it, dusts it, and hands it over in one seamless motion. You buy one naturally. The outside is crisp, the inside airy, and the sweetness clings to your fingertips long after the last bite. You sit on a stone step and watch as the women around you feed half the city. No shouting, no flamboyant knife tricks, no boasts, just precision, heat, and care. A girl no older than 12 brings a basket of bread rolls down the street, selling them 3 for a coin. A young woman with a tray of hard-boiled eggs walks past singing softly, her voice nearly drowned out by the crowd. And suddenly you realise how invisible this labour can be, how essential, how constant, and how easily overlooked. These aren't the grand feasts or flaming spits of festival fame. This is the everyday, the sustenance, the food that gets you through a morning shift or a night without coin. It's made with skill, but no celebration. Just hands, heat, and hours of work. You finish the last of your flatbread, lick your fingers, and stand. The street is buzzing now, the light shifting golden again as the day begins its slow descent. Somewhere nearby, a bell rings, and the woman at the pie stall begins to pack up. She stacks her trays, wraps her leftover dough, and gestures to the girls. They move quickly, wordlessly, without a single wasted motion, because tomorrow they'll do it all again, and the day after that. Fast food doesn't rest, especially when it's made by the people holding up half the city with one hand and kneading dough with the other. You walk a little slower now, belly comfortably full, the heat of roasted pork and honeyed flatbread still lingering in your limbs. The sun's dipped just enough to throw long amber slants across the road, highlighting the dust that floats in the air like flour on a baker's hands. The streets remain busy, never silent, not here. But the pace softens, and as you turn onto a quieter side street, a line catches your eye. Not long, not loud, just steady. They're waiting outside a bread stall. It's a simple setup. A long table with baskets of loaves piled high, behind which stands a man with arms like tree limbs, and a face that looks carved from bread itself, weathered, flour-dusted, and stoically unreadable. On one side of the table sit rows of pale, round loaves, soft-looking, near white. On the other, darker, rougher hunks of bread, cracked and uneven. You join the line, curious. The man calls out his prices in a dull, habitual tone. The white bread costs twice what the dark bread does. Predictably, most in line are here for the black loaves. You watch as a boy steps up, places 2 coins on the table, and receives a single piece of brown bread the size of his head. The man behind him offers 3 and gets a white loaf, wrapped in linen, handed over like a treasure. You're witnessing one of the clearest expressions of medieval class divide: bread. Not all bread was created equal. In fact, bread was arguably the most politically, economically, and socially charged food in the Middle Ages. What you ate, whether white, brown, rye, oat, or barley, was a visible, edible signal of your place in the world. Nobles ate fine white bread known as wastel or mancha, made with sifted wheat flour. Soft, light, and finely milled, it was a luxury product. Everyone else? They ate black bread, a dense, hearty loaf made with rye, barley, oats, and whatever else was on hand. You reach the front and opt for a slice of each. Why not? 1 dark, 1 light. You pay a little extra, curiosity tax. You bite into the black bread first. It's coarse and nutty, with a bitterness that reminds you this is food made to last, not to delight. It's chewy in the way that makes your jaw work overtime, but oddly comforting, the kind of food you imagine chewing through after a long day hauling bricks or chasing pigs. It's made to fill, not thrill. Then the white. It's soft, barely any crust. Light as air by comparison, but bland. So bland. Like someone tried to remove all flavour in exchange for status. You chew it, but it doesn't satisfy in the same way. It tastes like money, and like the absence of need. Bread wasn't just food. It was economics. It reflected crop yields, taxation, baking rights, and class laws. In many towns, only certain bakers were allowed to bake white bread, and only for the upper classes the grain was milled more finely, the flour sifted multiple times, and the loaves often smaller but more valuable. The poor could technically buy it, but at the cost of 2 or 3 days' wages. And this wasn't a system people accepted quietly. Bread riots were real and frequent. If bakers were caught shorting customers, overcharging, or using bad grain, punishment followed public shaming. Fines, confiscated ovens. In some cities, laws dictated the exact weight a loaf must have for the price charged. The size of bread regulations were posted like public commandments. Bread was serious business. One quirky historical detail? Some cities employed bread weighers, officials who roamed the streets with scales and weights to check if loaves were underweight. If they were, the baker could be fined, whipped, or forced to give out free bread for a week. Justice, 1 crumb at a time. You sit down nearby on a low stone wall and watch the line shift. A servant woman buys 2 black loaves and wraps them in a bit of linen, careful not to drop a single crumb. A man in slightly finer clothes buys a white loaf and eats it slowly, 1 dainty bite at a time. A beggar holds out a hand, and the baker, without hesitation, tosses him a heel of brown bread. Not warm, not fresh, but enough. There's debate among historians about whether the white bread of the Middle Ages was truly better or just more processed. Some argue that the lack of whole grain made it less nutritious. Others claim it was safer, as finer flour was less likely to contain ground-up debris or parasites. Either way, it was seen as cleaner, purer, more refined, which says more about how people viewed poverty than about what bread actually tasted like. You nibble the crust of your black loaf and feel oddly grounded. This is bread that fights back. That makes you earn every bite. But it's real honest. It sticks to your ribs and doesn't apologise for being dense. You imagine the baker waking before dawn, stoking his fire, mixing coarse flour with water and salt, kneading until his fingers ached, then pulling these loaves from the oven while the city still slept. Back in the festival square, food was performance. Here, bread is survival. Sold daily, eaten hourly, barely noticed but deeply essential. You wonder how many lives are measured in crusts, how many debts settled in loaves, how many families depend on this man behind the table, his floured hands, his sullen eyes, his work that never really ends. You finish the last of your bread and brush the crumbs from your lap. The street has quieted even more now, the light turning soft and blue. A woman walks past with a basket of loaves balanced on her head. A boy trails behind her, catching the last crumbs in his hands. Tomorrow there'll be more bread, more lines, more debate over who gets what and why. But tonight, you've tasted both sides. And as it turns out, hunger doesn't care how refined your flour is. You don't realise how far you've walked until the stones beneath your boots turn dusty, uneven, and just a little too quiet. The city's noise has dimmed into background hum, replaced by the sharper, more utilitarian clank of armour, the snort of horses, and the low grumble of men who haven't seen a proper mattress in weeks. You've wandered near the barracks, an encampment pressed against the city wall, where soldiers come and go with the weariness of people who sleep in shifts and eat with their fingers. And sure enough, there's food here. Not lavish spreads or sizzling street meat, but a line of tired-looking men gathered around what can only be described as the military version of a food stall. A fire pit with a dented cauldron hanging over it, and a grim-faced cook stirring with a ladle long enough to double as a weapon. Behind him, 2 squires scrape something off a flat iron sheet that might have once been pancakes, right you approach slowly, careful not to look like you're about to ask for a favour or challenge anyone to a duel. No one smiles. These men have the hollow-eyed look of people who know what an arrow sounds like up close, but they eat. Quietly, quickly, and as it turns out, almost exclusively with their hands.
Yeah.
You ask what's cooking, and the nearest soldier shrugs. Whatever was still salted and didn't smell like feet. You nod. Fair. A ladle of something thick lands in your borrowed bowl. A stew made from dried peas, chopped onions, and salted beef so tough it could survive a siege on its own. You're also handed a hard biscuit, known unofficially among the troops as toothbreakers. You try to bite into it and immediately regret your life choices. Welcome to the world of medieval military rations. Fast food on the front lines, where speed, storage, and survival matter more than taste. Armies couldn't rely on daily markets or kitchen staff. Their meals had to be mobile, durable, and immune to rot. Salted meat was king. Beef, pork, even fish, rubbed in salt until it turned stiff, then packed into barrels for travel. It could last weeks, sometimes months, though it needed soaking or stewing to be edible. And even then, edible was being generous. You dunk your biscuit into the stew until it softens enough to chew. It tastes like someone boiled cardboard in beef water, but you finish it anyway, and strangely, you feel better afterward. Fed. Grounded. Maybe a little closer to understanding the daily rhythm of men who carry swords for a living. One of the squires offers you a small pouch of dried fruit, mostly shriveled apples, a few slivers of pear. Trade from the last village, he says. Cook threatened to use it in a pie. We saved it. You smile and chew slowly. The sweetness a rare luxury in this meat-heavy world. Military cooks had to be part alchemist, part gambler. Working with limited tools, no fresh ingredients, and open fires in all weather, they became experts at making food not terrible. They stewed everything. Dried peas, onions, salted meat, wild herbs, sometimes turnips or cabbage, if nearby farms had extra. No spices unless they were filched or rationed from officer stores. The occasional beer or wine, poured into the pot to soften tough cuts. That's it. And they had to do it fast. Soldiers don't wait. When they're hungry, they eat. Burnt stew? Fine. Undercooked biscuit? That's your Jaws problem. It's food as fuel, and nothing more. There's a quirky little fact from a 14th century military ledger. Some units were issued portable ovens, tiny clay domes that could be placed over coals and used to bake bread or dry meat. Not common, but prized by cooks who didn't want to serve cold mush again. Others just baked in iron pots or cooked directly in the ashes. One record tells of a knight who cooked bacon on his shield. It worked, but he regretted it during the next battle. There's debate among historians about just how organised medieval army food really was. Some argue that most troops scavenged or bought food from civilian vendors who followed the army on campaign. Sutlers, they were called. Others believe large campaigns had actual logistical plans, barrels of grain, salted fish, livestock in tow. The truth probably sits in the muddy middle. If you were lucky, you ate stew. If you weren't, you stole cabbages from nearby fields and hoped the captain didn't notice. You watch as one soldier pulls a charred onion from the fire, blows on it, and eats it whole like an apple. Another unwraps a small wheel of hard cheese and slices it with a knife still stained from sharpening arrows. Everything here is efficient, reused, simplified to its barest form. A knife is your fork, bread is your plate, ale is your hydration, And yes, they have ale. Weak, warm, and served in dented metal mugs that have clearly been dropped one too many times. You're handed one without asking. It smells like barley and regret, but it washes down the salt and ash just fine. You sip slowly and glance around. The camp is less a dining area and more a battlefield in recovery. Bits of armour rest beside empty bowls. Shields lean against benches. A man nearby sharpens his dagger while chewing a piece of dried meat with terrifying focus. No one lingers after eating. It's food, then gone. The kind of fast food that moves with you. Cooked in the same pot where you once boiled water for wounds. You wipe your hands on your tunic again and hand back the mug. The soldier nods once. No thanks, no fuss. Just acknowledgement. You move on, stepping past stacked firewood and a row of boots drying beside the fire. There's something humbling about the experience. No flair, no spices, no bright festival pies or monk-blessed stew. Just function, salt, fire survival. In a way, it's the rawest version of fast food you've seen yet. And while your jaw may never forgive that biscuit, your stomach does. Because even here, in the mud and ash of a barracks kitchen, someone took the time to stir the pot, soak the meat, and hand you a bowl. That counts for something. The sun has nearly disappeared now, melting behind the silhouette of crooked rooftops and the jagged spine of the city wall. You move through the half-light with your shoulders sore and your breath visible, a cool mist settling over the cobbles. It's the kind of dusk that turns every shadow into a warning and every cough into a prayer. Because you're not just in any part of town now. You're in the part marked by memory, grief, and a faint whiff of vinegar. You've entered plague country. Not the plague as it once roared through with screams and black buboes, but its legacy, its dent. This neighbourhood remembers. The buildings lean a little harder here. Doors stay closed a little longer. You can still see the faded X on one wall, chalked and washed and chalked again over the years. Maybe it's symbolic now, maybe not. But what's undeniable is how the Black Death changed everything, especially how people ate, and how fast food, as precarious as it already was, adapted to survive. You step into a square that seems to breathe with hesitation. A few carts are set up, but they're different, set farther apart. Each vendor has a bucket of water beside their stall, holy water maybe, or just regular water blessed by hope and herbs. A woman in a faded headscarf dips a rag into it and wipes her counter every time she serves a customer. Her hands move automatically, like it's been drilled into her bones. You approach her and ask for a bowl of whatever she's making. Cabbage and vinegar, she says, boiled 3 times. You nod. She ladles it into a clay bowl, careful not to touch the rim. The smell is sharp, sour, and strangely cleansing. This is what street food looked like after the plague. Cautious, pared down, obsessively boiled, and more vinegar-soaked than a pickling shed. Fear lingered long after the rats had scurried off. Fear of meat, of contact, of anything that hadn't been cooked until it confessed its sins. Vinegar became a culinary and cultural shield. People soaked vegetables in it, cleaned bowls with it, even added it to soups to kill what they couldn't see. The thinking was simple. If something could strip rust from a knife, surely it could stop a fever. So now your cabbage stew tastes like a salad gone to war, but you eat it anyway, grateful for warmth. You glance around. Another vendor hands out bread soaked in broth, already torn into pieces so no one has to touch it. A third stirs a pot with gloves on, dipping in long leeks and whole onions that cook until they nearly disappear. Everything smells faintly of herbs, rosemary, sage, sometimes lavender. Not for taste, but for protection. People believed fragrant herbs could ward off miasma, the bad air that carried disease. A fringe historical detail, some food vendors wore masks during plague outbreaks, not the beaked doctor masks we all know, but simple cloths wrapped over their noses and mouths, often soaked in wine or rosewater. There's even a record of a cookshop in Avignon requiring vendors to wear sprigs of thyme pinned to their clothes, for the defence of the body and the public trust. Not exactly PPE, but the medieval version. You notice that every dish offered here is a variation of boiled meat, boiled greens, boiled porridge. No roasting, no charring. Raw food? Unthinkable. Even bread is recooked in broth to be considered safe. You buy a spoonful of lentils stewed with garlic and vinegar, served over a hunk of soggy rye. It's mushy, sour, and slightly burnt. You finish it all. The plague changed more than just ingredients. It gutted the market. So many bakers, brewers, butchers, gone. In some cities, entire food districts were wiped out. With fewer people came fewer hands to prepare, fewer mouths to feed, and fewer coin purses to chase. The supply chain, such as it was, collapsed, and fast food vendors had to become scavengers and strategists. They stretched flour with crushed beans. They made fake sausages from bread and blood. They sold soup so thin it might as well have been a prayer. And yet, the hunger remained. People still needed to eat. So the stalls stayed open, shaky, cautious, but open. You admire the resilience of it. The fire didn't go out, even if it had to burn with scraps. There's debate among scholars about whether food safety actually improved after the plague. Some argue that fear brought better habits, cleaner stalls, boiled dishes, fewer raw risks. Others point out that desperation still ruled, and in many cases food just seemed safer because people needed to believe something could keep death away. The truth, as usual, lives somewhere in the grey haze of uncertainty. You stand quietly, bowl in hand, as the vendor wipes her counter again. She nods to you, and for a moment you see the exhaustion in her eyes, not just from work, but from living in a world that knows how fast everything can unravel. Behind her, a small wooden sign reads, "Clean fire, clean water, clean hands. 3 rules, 3 hopes, maybe 3 lies. Doesn't matter." People still line up. You step away, the taste of vinegar clinging to your mouth like a memory. The air is colder now. You can see your breath. Somewhere in the distance, someone coughs. A dry, rattling sound that freezes the street for half a second before everything resumes. Because that's the deal now. Pause, flinch, continue. You pass a boy selling cloves and rose petals tied in cloth bundles. Plague bags, he calls them. Smell this and live. You buy one, hold it to your face. It smells like fear trying to be hope. And as you walk, you wonder how many people were fed in this very square during the worst days. How many hands shook as they accepted a bowl. How many vendors showed up knowing they could die, but choosing to stir the pot anyway. Fast food didn't stop during the plague. It just boiled deeper. And in that steam was something more than hunger. It was survival. The air tonight carries more than cold. It carries ritual. A slow, humming tension, the kind that tugs at people's habits and rearranges the day's menu without asking for consent. Because tonight's not just any night. It's a Friday, and it's not just any Friday. It's deep into Lent, and the food stalls feel it like a weight pressing down on every cooking pot and cutting board in town. You smell no meat, not a single thread of bacon in the air, no sausage grease slipping along the cobbles, no burnt pork bones glistening in the firelight. Instead, the dominant scents are fish, bread, and something herbaceous. Likely a holy blend of necessity and desperation. You're entering the realm where fast food and faith collide. Religion wasn't a weekend activity in the Middle Ages. It was the calendar, the schedule, the menu, and the unrelenting voice in everyone's ear. And when the church said no meat, people listened, some because they believed, some because they feared damnation, and many because the church also employed people to check enforcement wasn't always subtle. Selling meat during a fast day could get you fined, banned, or hauled up before a bishop with nothing but your prayer beads and excuses. So what did medieval fast food look like when meat was off the table? You don't have to look far. The first stall you pass is steaming with fish stew, thin, white-fleshed cod cooked in broth with leeks and garlic. It smells good, even if it looks like it was cooked in the dark by someone afraid of flavour. You accept a bowl, eat it slowly. It's salty, watery, but hot, a comfort against the chill, if not a thrill. The next stall sells fried herring, split down the middle, breaded in coarse meal, and cooked in oil over open coals. You watch a man bite into one, pick out a bone, and keep chewing like nothing happened. You follow suit. The fish is crisp, with a sharpness from vinegar poured over it right before serving. It's fast food that answers to heaven, and not just on Fridays. In the medieval church calendar, there were a lot of meatless days, over 100 every year depending on how pious or paranoid your local priests were. Lent alone demanded 40 days of abstinence. Advent added more. Even Wednesdays and Saturdays could come with meat bans. So food vendors adapted. They made mock meats, dishes designed to imitate sausage or roast without actually being, well, enjoyable. You spot one now. A breaded patty made from ground almonds, chickpeas and herbs. You bite in. It tastes like someone once read a recipe for meat and got distracted halfway through, but it's warm and weirdly filling. One stall, tucked in a churchyard corner, sells only fish pies. They're marked with crosses carved into the crust, both a signal of piety and a subtle nudge to customers. This one's holy, not ham. You try one. The crust is flakier than most you've had today, and the filling, eel and onions, is rich without breaking any religious laws, technically. There's a historical debate here. Some scholars argue that the church's rules helped develop a whole subgenre of creative cuisine, forcing cooks to explore new ways to feed people without relying on meat. Others suggest it just led to a lot of cheating. Fish cooked to look like chicken. Eggs claimed to be spiritual food, not animal flesh. One record tells of a noble who insisted that beaver tail counted as fish. Because beavers swam, the church eventually agreed. The beaver did not get a say. You sip a mug of ale, yes, still allowed, and take in the subtle pressure all around you. The stalls are quieter tonight. No one shouting, no aggressive upselling, just careful compliance. You see one vendor quietly packing up a bucket of pork sausages, hiding them under a sack of onions. A woman stands nearby, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. She doesn't say anything, but her expression promises a quick confession if he's caught. Religion wasn't just present, it structured the medieval food world. Vendors knew when to offer meat, when to swap to fish, when to fast entirely. Some even built two menus, one for ordinary days, one for holy days. Taverns did the same. The good ones had Lenten pottage and Advent pie ready to go like an ecclesiastical fast food combo. You find a baker selling bread rolls filled with onions and herbs. No lard in the dough, he swears, only olive oil. Expensive, but acceptable. He hands one over with a solemn nod, as though this roll has passed spiritual inspection. You eat it, and it's surprisingly good. Savoury, aromatic, and dense enough to quiet your stomach's constant complaints. It strikes you, as you finish the roll and wipe your hands, how deeply tied food is to the rhythms of belief. You can't separate hunger from holiness here, not when what you eat, and when, might affect your soul's fate. That's a heavy burden for a fried herring to carry. You walk on, passing a child selling pickled eggs with a note pinned to her tunic. Approved by Father Matthias. She looks too tired to lie. You buy one. It's sour, firm, and oddly comforting. Even street food takes on ritual during fasting periods. Vendors recite their ingredients like scripture. Crosses are carved into pies, herbs are blessed before being boiled, and the line between dinner and devotion blurs completely. You could be eating a bowl of fish stew, but if it's Friday and the right prayer is said, it might also be your penance. You finish your egg and tuck the shell into a crack in the wall, alongside dozens of others. A small tradition, apparently. Maybe for luck, maybe for no reason at all. The bells ring again, 3 slow tolls, and the street begins to thin. Some vendors pack up. Others kneel beside their stalls to say prayers. The air feels heavier, the night colder. Not unpleasant, just hushed. You take one last look at the row of stalls, still warm with steam and quiet resolve. In a world where hunger never sleeps, even heaven has to accommodate a few quick meals, just as long as they're meatless. The city is nearly asleep now. Candles flicker behind shuttered windows, casting faint halos on the cobbles. Even the cats, who've spent the day loitering near food stalls and stealing cooling pies, have disappeared into the cracks. You're left wandering the alleys, with only the soft hush of distant voices and the faint smell of wood smoke for company. And yet, something stirs ahead. A glow, a scent, a low thrum of conversation. Not loud, not showy, just steady. You follow it, curiosity leading your feet more than hunger now, and find yourself at the edge of what looks like a covered alleyway, tucked behind a row of taverns. The entrance is flanked by barrels and broken crates, almost like it doesn't want to be found. But inside, the warmth is immediate, not just heat from the fire, but from the people. This is the after-hours cookshop, the medieval equivalent of a late-night diner, where workers, night guards, travellers, and anyone who can't quite sleep find their way for one last bowl, one last bite, one last bit of comfort before the long dark settles in. You slip inside and sit on a worn bench at a shared table. A woman with a wide apron and soot-smudged cheeks hands you a bowl without asking what you want. That's how it works here. There's no menu, no performance, just what's left and whatever's hot. Tonight, it's onion broth. Thin, salty, flecked with herbs. A crust of bread floats in the middle, already soaked through. You take the bowl in your hands and sip slowly. It's not fancy, not layered, not particularly interesting. But it's warm, and it makes your shoulders relax for the first time in hours. These cook shops didn't get much fanfare in the official records. They weren't taverns or inns, didn't always have signage, and operated in that grey space between legal and necessary. Some were just back kitchens that stayed open after closing. Others were family homes that moonlighted as soup vendors once the bells tolled. But they were essential. Not everyone had a hearth to cook on, especially among the city's poorer residents. Many lived in tenements with no chimney, no pots, no space, so they ate out. Not as a luxury, but as survival. And at night, when the market stalls closed and the bakers went silent, places like this kept the city alive. A man across from you eats with closed eyes, spooning stew from a shallow bowl that smells faintly of lentils and beer. Another man sits slumped beside him, chewing what looks like a strip of dried meat while nodding along to a soft song hummed by a woman at the end of the bench. No one speaks loudly, no one lingers longer than they need to. This isn't a social hour. It's a quiet agreement between the hungry and the tired. One curious fact: some cities had specific laws about when cookshops could operate. They were sometimes banned from serving food after curfew hours unless they paid extra fines, or unless they were feeding guards, monks, or people on official business. Of course, that rule was mostly ignored, especially when the constable himself might be stopping by for a bite after patrol. You notice as your eyes adjust how cleverly the space is arranged. One woman tends the fire, another pours thin ale into chipped mugs, and a third is ladling broth from a pot so deep it could hide a small child. There are no tables, just boards stretched over barrels, no bowls match. Everyone eats elbow to elbow, but with a quiet respect for the fact that no one here wants to make conversation. It's comfort food, not because of what it is, but because of when and where it finds you. You mop up the last of your broth with the soggy crust and hand back your bowl. The woman who served you gives a tired smile, not a polite one, but the kind that says, "You're all right." It feels like a blessing. There's scholarly debate about the role of these shops in shaping urban food culture. Some historians argue that they were precursors to modern restaurants, open kitchens where you paid for a single dish and sat among strangers. Others see them as extensions of communal living, places where people, particularly the working poor, relied on shared space and shared meals. Either way, they're often overlooked, too humble for chroniclers, too informal for the guilds, but unmistakably vital. You watch as a young couple enters, clearly exhausted with clothes damp from mist and a baby wrapped tight to the woman's chest. They sit, and within moments 2 bowls are placed before them. No words, just food. The baby stirs, the mother sips. The man rests his head in his hand and breathes like he hasn't all day. This is what fast food looked like in the after hours. No flourishes, no fire tricks, just sustenance handed over in silence. The food equivalent of a warm blanket. One man stands abruptly and leaves a coin on the barrel. The door swings shut behind him. Another woman shuffles in and takes his place without a pause. The bench never cools. The rhythm continues. You wonder how many people have eaten here over the years, how many stories pass through this doorway unspoken. Grief, joy, hunger, fear. All boiled down into one more spoonful of broth, one more crust of bread. You stretch, your body slower now, heavy with warmth. You've eaten all day. Pies, trenchers, stews, meat, fish and mystery patties. But this simple bowl at the end of it all? This feels the most human, the most timeless. You thank the cook with a nod. She nods back, already moving to refill another bowl. No names, no tab, just understanding. Outside the mist has thickened. The city's asleep, or pretending to be. You pull your cloak tighter and walk into the fog, the last taste of broth still on your tongue, your breath ghosting into the cold air. Somewhere behind you, the kettle boils again. Another bowl is filled, and another night carries forward on the back of something warm, fast and quietly kind. The streets are hushed now, every sound amplified by the stillness, your boots on damp stone, the occasional sigh of wind curling between shutters, the soft drip of water from a gutter above. You move like a ghost through the sleeping city. The buzz of taverns long faded, cook fires cooling, the day's scents now just faint memories clinging to corners. But up ahead, Past the stables and the closed gates of a grain merchant's yard, you spot a single flicker of firelight, steady, stubborn, and alive. It's a cart, a real one this time. Wooden, two-wheeled, painted once but now dulled with soot and grease. It's parked under a crooked beam jutting from a tenement, smoke rising from a small brazier inside the cart's belly. The vendor isn't shouting. He doesn't need to. The smell does the talking. Charred, sweet, unmistakably late night. You drift closer and see it at last. Hot meat pies, but not the carefully marked, respectable kind you saw earlier. These are sloppy, mismatched, oozing from their crusts like they've been hurried into existence by someone who had no time for neatness. You're handed one without a word. No questions, no coins exchanged yet. This is the post-curfew economy. Pay later, or don't. Depends how well the vendor remembers your face. You bite in. It's hot, recklessly hot. You burn your tongue immediately and have no regrets. The crust is thin, crumbling at the edges, barely holding together inside. Meat, you think. Probably pork. Could be mutton. You taste sage, onion, and just enough salt to make you want another bite. It's glorious messy. Defiant. This is the realm of the Moon Market, an unofficial, unlicensed network of food vendors who operated deep into the night, feeding those who didn't stop working when the sun set. Bakers finishing late shifts, guards on patrol, prostitutes waiting for dawn, thieves full of adrenaline and hunger. These carts didn't follow guild rules. They didn't always ask permission. They were nimble, adaptable, and technically illegal most of the time, and yet they flourished. Because hunger isn't bound by law, and neither is a craving. A man next to you, drunk, humming to himself, orders 2 pies and a slab of something grilled on a spit. A small piece of offal wrapped in cool fat, charred at the edges. He pays in buttons. The vendor shrugs, pockets them. Barter. Favours. IOUS, scrawled on the backs of other people's parchments. This economy has its own rules. You ask for one of those skewers, out of both curiosity and mild peer pressure. The vendor hands it over. You bite carefully. It's fatty, gamey, intensely seasoned with mustard seed and something smoky. Not bad. Probably liver, possibly pigeon. You've learned not to ask after dark. This corner of the food world was never meant to be polished. It was born of need, fed by fatigue, and sharpened by risk. Some nights, vendors like this one were chased off by the constable, their carts seized, their food dumped in the street. Other nights, the constable showed up for a bowl of stew and a bit of gossip. Depends on the mood, depends on the moon. One quirky fact. In some cities, moon market vendors were rumoured to have secret whistles. 2 notes for safe, 1 for move, 3 for hide the meat. No proof survives, but several surviving tavern songs reference whistle pie men and midnight stew, suggesting that this wasn't just trade, it was culture. There's scholarly debate about whether these vendors were just rogue cooks, or something closer to a proto-foodie underground. Some argue they were simply poor folks making do. Others suggest they were the innovators, experimenting with flavours and combinations no daytime vendor dared try nighttime food, had fewer rules, fewer eyes. If you wanted to try meat with pickled walnuts or stewed leeks on oatcakes, this was your window. You walk past another stall, a woman grilling dough on a flat iron sheet, pressing it flat with her palm, then filling it with chopped eggs and leeks. Moon pockets, she calls them. You buy one. The dough is still soft and slightly sour from resting too long, but the filling is warm and herbaceous, the eggs crumbling gently into the bread like a hug wrapped in carbs. It's not just what's being sold, it's how. Vendors talk in whispers, laugh low, share small bits of news. One tells another where a certain guard patrols. Another warns about a church warden sniffing around tomorrow's stalls. Information flows as freely as ale. And speaking of ale, yes, it's still here. Thin, slightly sour, but poured in wooden cups or clay mugs without judgment. You're handed one, again without asking. You drink it slowly. It tastes like it was brewed in a hurry and stored in a bucket. But it's wet and you're thirsty. There's a young boy tending a small fire under a pot. He's stirring something, maybe broth, maybe porridge, maybe trouble. You ask. He shrugs. Whatever didn't sell today. You laugh. Take a bowl. It's lentils, barley, some kind of fat and a surprising kick of garlic. It shouldn't work, it does. And that's the charm of these places. There's no presentation, no branding, just necessity disguised as creativity. These cooks feed whoever shows up. No seating, no cutlery, just bowls, bread, heat, and trust. You stand there for a long time, eating your moon pocket, finishing your ale, letting the firelight warm your hands. Around you, the city hums quietly. The side of it most people don't see unless they're still awake for a reason. This is the final phase of medieval fast food. Not glamorous, not celebrated, but absolutely essential. Because hunger doesn't care about curfews. It doesn't respect church bells or royal edicts. It walks in the dark, finds a cart and pays with whatever it has. And in return it gets a pie. Burnt edges, mystery meat and all. You leave the moon market behind slowly, walking through the mist like someone trying not to wake a sleeping giant. The food lingers in your belly, warm, savoury and slightly confusing, but it's welcome comfort in the deep silence of a city between shifts. By now, even the drunks have gone quiet. Somewhere in the distance a dog barks once and then thinks better of it. You round a corner near the city wall, following instincts more than direction, and find a sight that almost seems out of place for how still everything else is. A baker's oven, still glowing. It's built into the side of a stone building. Part shop, part home, part neighbourhood necessity. The smell of bread, real bread, fresh and rising, floats on the cold air like a siren song you'd thought all the baking had wrapped up hours ago. But this is the baker's hour. The strange liminal time when the rest of the city sleeps and the bakers begin. You step closer, half expecting to be shooed away, but the baker, middle-aged, flour-dusted, and absolutely not surprised by your appearance, just lifts a hand in greeting, no words. He gestures to a nearby bench and nods toward a small tray resting on a shelf. You sit. The bench is warm from the oven wall. He hands you a roll. No charge. Not tonight. It's still hot, crusty on the outside, steaming in the middle. Simple. White flour, water, yeast, and maybe just a ghost of salt. You bite in, and for a second, nothing else matters. Most medieval fast food depended on people like him, those who worked through the night to make mornings possible. Bakers weren't just bread makers, they were the city's pulse. Their ovens never truly went cold. They served vendors, taverns, monasteries, markets, hospitals and homes. Without them, nothing started. And yet, baking was brutal. Long hours, heavy labour, hot, dangerous ovens, strict guild rules that punished you if your loaves were too light, or if you skimped on flour. A single bad batch could mean fines or shame, or worse, suspicion of cheating customers. The assize of bread laws were no joke. Loaves were weighed, prices monitored, ingredients scrutinised. This baker seems unconcerned. He moves like someone who's done the same task every day for 40 years and no longer thinks about it. He shapes dough with a kind of sleepy grace, tossing it into baskets, scoring the tops with a practiced flick. He says nothing, but everything about him speaks of rhythm, ritual, and quiet purpose. Nearby, a younger apprentice shovels embers into the mouth of the oven, his face lit orange in the glow. He glances at you and grins, flour smudged across his cheek like war paint. He's too young to be tired yet. You notice other things too. A small basket of hard rolls labelled for delivery to the hospital, a tray of oatcakes set aside for the poorhouse, a few sweet buns, raisin-studded, likely reserved for a priest or noble household. Even in the silence, the flow of the city continues, and the baker is one of the few who still has his hands on the wheel. A quirky bit of history. Bakers often had agreements with local taverns or street vendors. They didn't just sell bread, they loaned oven space. Many vendors lacked proper hearths, so they'd prepare pies or dough at home and bring them here to be baked. These arrangements were semi-formal, a coin here, a loaf there, or sometimes just a trade-in-kind bread for stew, heat for help. You're watching that very thing now. A woman enters carrying a tray of small meat pies carefully covered with linen. She hands them over, and the apprentice takes them into the back with a nod. No discussion, just habit. Her cart is probably out there somewhere, cooling in the dark, ready to serve first thing at dawn. There's a scholarly debate about how communal these ovens really were. Some argue they were tightly controlled, only accessible to guild members. Others point to records of public bakehouses, shared spaces where people could rent time and fire. And in poorer neighbourhoods, it's likely that the baker's oven doubled as the neighbourhood hearth, a literal hotspot for news, gossip, and the occasional stolen recipe. The baker hands you another roll, this one darker, maybe rye. You take it, bite in, and taste a little molasses, a little smoke, still hot, still good. Your fingers are dusted with flour now. You feel like you've become part of the night's rhythm, folded into it like a bit of dough waiting to rise. You sip water from a tin mug offered by the apprentice. It's lukewarm but clean, and it clears your throat better than ale would have. You realise you haven't spoken a word since you arrived, and it doesn't matter. This space is built on silence. Eventually the woman returns for her pies, baked and golden, the edges curled just slightly from the heat. She nods her thanks, collects them, and disappears into the fog, her footsteps soft and fading. The baker finally speaks, just one word. Morning. You glance up. The sky's lighter now, barely. A hint of grey behind the rooftops. You blink, startled. Somehow the night has passed. The baker shrugs as if to say, "This happens." He goes back to shaping dough. The apprentice starts sweeping flour from the stones. A rooster crows miles away, and the sound feels like a curtain lifting. You stand, thank the baker with a quiet nod, and leave the last bit of crust on the bench. Maybe someone else will need it. Maybe not. The streets are beginning to stir again. A cart rumbles in the distance. A door creaks open. Somewhere, someone is slicing cheese. The food world begins anew. But in this little corner, where the ovens never stopped, the day has already begun, and it smells like bread. The sky shifts from grey to pearl as dawn officially presses its thumbprint on the city. A few clouds cling stubbornly to the horizon, but the light seeps through anyway, slow and silvery, like a secret creeping in the streets. Once hushed and heavy with sleep begin to rustle to life. Doors creak open. Dogs stretch and shake off the night. From the rooftops, pigeons begin their morning diplomacy, fluttering, cooing, eyeing breadcrumbs that don't yet exist. You walk with that strange weight that comes after a long night of wandering and eating. Not quite tired, not quite awake. Somewhere in between, you've seen every kind of meal this city has to offer, from spicy sausage and fried fish to stewed lentils and midnight mystery pies. And now, you find yourself drifting toward one last stop, not because you're still hungry, but because there's a kind of poetic symmetry in ending where it all begins. And at the morning market, it's already stirring by the time you arrive. Vendors are unpacking carts, stretching aching limbs and shouting greetings that sound more like challenges than hellos, produce being arranged in pyramid-like stacks. Fishmongers slap their wares on wet boards, scales glinting in the early light. Bakers roll out steaming carts. Loaves still hot from the ovens you left just an hour before, smoke curls from early fires. Metal clangs. Somewhere a man is arguing about the price of radishes with the same energy most people reserve for war. But what catches your eye isn't the chaos, it's the rhythm. You realise slowly that this is the city's breakfast table. Not in the way we think of breakfast today, no omelettes or orange juice, no pastries piled on porcelain, but in the raw, immediate need to get calories into the body before the work begins. These meals aren't designed for leisure. They're tactical, strategic, fast. You watch a cooper buy a boiled egg and an onion wrapped in cloth, eating both in 2 alternating bites as he walks. A servant girl chews dried apple slices between gulps of weak ale while leading a goat that clearly resents its life choices. An apprentice bites into a slab of rye bread, dips it into a bucket of broth at a vendor's stall, and keeps walking, wiping his mouth on his sleeve like he's on a personal mission from God. You're tempted by a vendor selling thick porridge ladled into shallow bowls, barley, oats, and bits of dried plum sweetened slightly with honey. You buy one, the steam rising to meet your face like a gentle slap. It's thick, hearty, a little chewy, and comforting. Nothing flashy, nothing bold. But this is food designed to armour your gut for a day of hauling bricks or sewing until your fingers blister. Fast food at this hour doesn't come with flair. It comes in clay bowls wrapped in bread or cupped in palms. It's ale instead of coffee, eggs with ash still on them, bread that scratches a little going down, but it's quick, cheap, filling, and reliable. You glance around and notice something easy to miss in the daylight. How many people are eating while moving? This is breakfast on the go, trenchers tucked under arms, cheese hunks wedged into belts, mugs dangling from hooks. The city doesn't slow down for a meal. It demands that the meal keeps up. A few things surprise you. One stall is selling warm goat milk spiced with crushed coriander and honey. An unusual treat this early, but the line is steady. Another is grilling flatbread smeared with garlic paste and crushed greens. Less of a breakfast dish and more of a "don't tell my priest I ate this before Mass" sort of thing. You get one. It's pungent, oily, and incredible. Your breath may suffer, but your soul feels strangely nourished. There's also a small crowd around a woman selling egg pies, miniature ones, baked in what looks like repurposed oyster shells. Eggs, leeks, herbs, a bit of cheese if you're lucky you ask for one. She hands it over with a wink. It's just barely warm, but bursting with flavour. Savoury, creamy, full of morning confidence. You pass a group of boys playing near a cart that's roasting chickpeas in a flat pan. They scatter when a merchant yells, but not before grabbing a handful each and stuffing them into their tunics. The vendor just rolls his eyes and keeps stirring. He's seen it before, he'll see it again. One curious footnote. In some towns, morning food vendors were strictly regulated, allowed only in certain streets, banned from others. The logic: early food meant early trash, and early trash meant rats. Some neighbourhoods banned breakfast vendors outright to keep the streets cleaner, while others taxed them extra to pay for cleaning. Not that it stopped the vendors. Breakfast, like rats, always finds a way. There's a scholarly argument that medieval breakfast was more widespread than traditionally believed. While elite records often downplay morning meals, branding them as uncouth or indulgent, the evidence from the street is louder. People ate in the mornings. A lot. Especially workers, travellers, and anyone who had to lift, walk, hammer, or haul something heavy before lunch. It may not have been a feast, but it was fuel. You finish your flatbread and lick the garlic oil from your fingers, suddenly aware that the market has hit full stride. The noise swells, the sunlight has finally cleared the rooftops, and just like that, the night is gone. The vendors you visited earlier are probably home by now, asleep or washing dishes. The night markets are packing away their embers. The cookshops are wiping down benches. The monks have rung their bells for morning prayers. The bakers' fires are cooling, and the moon pies are now just rumours in the mouths of people too tired to explain why they smell like smoked sausage and sage. But here, in the morning market, medieval fast food lives on in full voice. You pass a final cart on your way out. Just a boy with a cloth sack full of something that smells sweet. You ask. "Dried fruit and toasted oats," he says. "A penny a handful." You take two, munching as you walk. It's chewy, crunchy, slightly smoky, and exactly what you didn't know you wanted. The city's awake now, but you've eaten your way through its hours, wandered through time with grease on your sleeves and stories in your belly. And though the flavours will fade, the memory won't. You've tasted a day in medieval fast food, and somehow you're still standing. You made it, start to finish, dusk to dawn, bite to bowl, from boiling monk stews to midnight moon pies, and you're still upright. Barely. Your tunic's a mess. Your breath smells like garlic and smoked eel. Your boots have a suspicious smear of gravy across the toe. But there's a warmth in your chest now, low and steady, that has nothing to do with fire or fat. You've seen the heartbeat of a medieval city, and it beat through its food. Not the royal feasts, not the castle banquets with roasted swan and gold-dusted pears. This was the other story. The fast, the cheap, the smoky, the spilled food for people who worked, who prayed, who wandered, who sold their wares or their time or both. People who didn't have kitchens, people who cooked because if they didn't eat the pie women, the back-alley bakers, the monks with mortar and pestle, the men grilling goat lungs in a barrel at midnight, the children selling eggs, and the girls pouring ale thinner than rainwater. And it wasn't just food, it was everything that came with it. The rules, the risks, the sacred fasts, the whispered cheats, the ingenuity of pressing scraps into satisfaction, the soft hum of prayer in a cookshop, the way vinegar tried to scare away death, and the quiet, holy moment of someone handing you a bowl without asking who you were. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't clean, it definitely wasn't vegan, but it was real and human and fast in all the ways that mattered. So now, wherever you are, in a soft bed or a creaky chair, with modern snacks at arm's reach or dinner still waiting in the kitchen, breathe out deep. Let the world slow again. Let the stories settle in your bones. Because for one night, you travelled back. You ate your way across centuries, and you probably won't look at a meat pie the same way ever again.